Okay, perfect. Well, again, good morning, everyone. My name is Bridget Budville. I'm staff here at the Criminal Justice Commission. Welcome to the first Restorative Justice Grant Program application review meeting. We appreciate your being here. And first things first, I'm going to, again, we're going to introduce staff. We're going to introduce the members of our advisory committee, and then we'll get going with the sort of meeting overview. So again, just to make sure everyone knows, my name is Bridget Budville. I use she, her pronouns. I'm staff here at CJC. I'll turn it over to my colleagues, Casey and Rachel.
Thanks, Bridget. Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Dahlstrom. I am also staff here at the CJC. I use she, her pronouns, and happy to be here. Rachel?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Rachel MacArthur. I am staff here at CJC, and I'm looking forward to having a good, productive day.
Great, thank you, everyone. Real quick, I do want to do just a housekeeping note. I know we've all gotten more familiar with Teams and all that good stuff, which is great. We are going to not use chat today. There's going to be ample opportunity for questions and discussion. There will be opportunity for public comment. Chat becomes, it's helpful sometimes, but in these public meetings, particularly in decision-making meetings, it's challenging because we have to make sure that we read all of the comments into the public record. It becomes hard to keep track of who was responding to what, and just for the sake of kind of staying on top of this, please don't use chat. You don't need, I mean, raising your hand is helpful. That's great. If you want, for members, just unmute yourselves. That's okay too. We don't want this to be too, but again, no chat, please. All right, so I'm gonna do a bit of a roll call for our Grant Advisory Committee members. So when I call your name, would you just introduce yourself as you would like, if pronouns if you like, organization if you like, and then we'll get going further. So I'll start with Tristan Edwards.
Morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Tristan. I am a major felony attorney at Metropolitan Public Defender, and I serve on the Racial Justice Council's Police Accountability and Criminal Justice Reform Committee. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Simon Fulford.
Hi, folks. Simon Fulford, he, him pronouns. Wearing the hat of President of the Restorative Justice Coalition of Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Aaron Knott.
Yo, I'm Aaron Knott. I am the Policy Director for District Attorney Mike Schmidt, and I use he, him pronouns.
Thank you, Aaron. Michael Wu. All right, I'll come back to Michael. Shannon Wilson.
Good morning, everyone. Shannon Wilson. I use they, them pronouns. I am the Executive Director at the Public Defender's Office here in Marion County. It's wonderful to see everyone.
Hey, Bridget.
Oh, yes.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I just got an email from Michael Wu saying he's trying to resolve some things and he should be on shortly.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yep.
Hi, Bridget. This is Michael. I could not get the my Teams to work, so I'm joining by phone.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Michael, before I forget, would you mind just giving a quick introduction of yourself, name, pronouns, organization?
Yes, Michael Wu. I'm Executive Director of the Oregon District Attorneys Association. I use he and him.
Thank you, Michael. Carrie Naughton. All right, I will return to Carrie. Vanessa Timmons.
Good morning. I also am joining by phone this morning until I can get some internet things working. I'm Vanessa Timmons, the Executive Director of the Oregon Coalition, and I use her, she, her pronouns.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. Ashley Beatty. All right, I'll return to Ashley. Charlotte Johnston Brosnan.
Hi, I'm Charlie Johnston Brosnan. I'm with Community Solutions of Central Oregon, which is the Community Dispute Resolution Center in Central Oregon. And I use she, her.
Thank you, Charlie, and I apologize for that name pronunciation.
No worries.
Well, I will never not know that now. Thank you. Do we have Elaine Walters?
You do. I'm here. Elaine Walters with the Trauma Healing Project in Eugene. I'm glad to see everyone this morning. Thanks.
Thank you, Elaine. Let's see. Do we have Michael Kaiser? Okay, I don't see Michael. William Barnes.
Good morning, everybody. I'm William Barnes, the current executive director of RRW down in Klamath Falls, Oregon.
Thank you, William. Do we have Carrie Naughton? I don't want to forget in case someone's joined. Okay. Well, as we get going, I will make sure to check for anyone else who's joined us a little bit late. I did want to ask, I know of one person who has a hard stop at 2 o'clock. For our membership, are there any other members who have something that obligates them to leave before our sort of scheduled end time of 3 p.m. today?
Yes, this is William Barnes. I have to jump off at 9 for probably about an hour. There's and I'll be back.
Thank you, William. Perfect. Thank you, William. Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. Got roll done. So this meeting's, oh, I see a hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, Bridget, this is Shannon Wilson. So I have to go to Portland at some point, so I'll be switching over to my phone. And then I do have a doctor's appointment that starts at 12:45. So thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. We will accommodate, we will get the work done within these parameters. So again, before we get going, I just want to say we appreciate the grant review committee members' time. We couldn't do this work without you. We know it's a big chunk of a day that you probably had a lot of other things to do. Same thing for anyone who applied. I know we do have some applicants observing our public meeting today. It is really important to be mindful that a lot of time and effort went into all of these applications, and that we wouldn't have a program to begin if folks didn't take it upon themselves to try something new. So we do really appreciate everyone who put in the effort. Deltra, I see your hands up.
Yes, hello. I just want to know if there's an agenda for the day somewhere, and I haven't seen it yet.
So this, the slide in front of you is more or less our agenda, and it will have a timestamp on our next slide. So essentially, we're going to break this up into kind of two parts. One is shorter than the other. The first is we're going to do some foundations of this grant, a roles and requirements refresher. That will be relatively brief because membership has heard this before, but for the sake of folks in the audience or anyone who wasn't able to attend that first meeting, we're going to go over a conflicts explanation, an application review, overview how the applications will be reviewed by this group, and the options for decision making, because the grant review committee in the House bill that created it or created the opportunity for CJC to create the advisory committee and rule does not require one decision making mode over another, voting majority versus consensus. So we do want to give you the opportunity to discuss and make a decision about that. And then the latter part, the remaining much larger chunk of time, is the actual application review. I'll be passing this over to Casey and Rachel. We'll be collaborating on this going forward. But we'll go over a review demo just to kind of show you. These are the pieces that you're going to be looking at on slides. Of course, we've all read stem to stern all of the applications that were submitted. Then, the sort of big piece of this is the committee members will deliberate and discuss each submitted application. Committee decisions will be made on application approvals because in this grant, the legislature gave the discretion and authority of approving applications to go to our commission for funding awards to the grant advisory committee. And then committee recommendations on supplemental funding options. We'll get into this more later, but this grant, the overall request made came in under the available funds. So there is some, even assuming that all awards were made in total, there's still extra money. Then there's a couple different things you can do. To be very clear, the commission is the only body that can spend money, but this body can make recommendations as to what might be good ideas for how to allocate any unallocated funds after the end of this meeting here. And at any point, if something's unclear or you can't hear or you have something just goes wrong, please just type up. We want everyone to be able to keep track of this important meeting. So here's our schedule. This is, estimated. We're going to do our level best. We're going to start, this first period about till 8:30 is kind of a nuts and bolts part of time, and then we're going to go into the actual application review. This schedule here with a 15-minute break at 10 and a 30-minute lunch break off screen. The break can also be off screen, but just so we're all clear, you don't have to eat lunch on camera and keep rolling. This allots about 30 to 35 minutes per application. You don't have to stick to that, but that's just to give you an estimate. If we start going over 35 minutes per application on average, we will exceed that 3 p.m. And then there's options there too, but just to kind of keep in mind. And we do want to be respectful of folks' time too. So pre-review foundations. This is again kind of the reminder of how this grant works, so we can all go into this discussion with this fresh in our minds. These are the rules. Staff has the role of reviewing applications for completeness. We assess applications for adherence to rules and program preferences. We also ensure that the grant review advisory committee or grant review committee and the commission apply rules consistently, so that if you're going to prefer one thing here, we have to make sure that we're doing it consistently over here, or at least have a very good reason why we're going to depart from that. That applies to preferences, not rules. We all have to follow the rules. The review committee, which is this group, you evaluate applications, a rubric, and you will bring to this conversation your own understanding and preferences to how these programs would ideally work. You're going to discuss things, and then you get to, like I mentioned, approve these applications to the commission, where they make the ultimate funding decision on applications you send them. And if there's any questions about that, please ask questions if you like. Conflicts. So this is really, we discussed this with the grant review committee previously, but just for the public to know, how do a lot of our members come from the world in which restorative justice operates? So how can you both be part of a grant review committee and also get to approve an application for funding? So here's how this works. As members of this committee, you become public officials kind of on behalf of this agency. You have ethical obligations because of that important role, because you get to influence the outcome of state government. Essentially here, an actual or potential conflict pops up when you make a decision that would result in a financial benefit or loss to you or your relatives or your business. So what we did here in this grant program to avoid that is any member who could potentially benefit from an award to an application, let's say that you work for that organization, or an application would partner with your organization and you receive funding. Those conflicts were disclosed to staff already. Those members did not participate in any application rubric scoring for an application they were conflicted on, and they will not participate in deliberations or vote to approve an application they're conflicted on. It doesn't mean you have to leave the meeting. It just means, if your application comes up and you hear people saying things, you don't get to pipe up and argue for it. So again, that's how this works. And again, if there are questions, please feel free. So the application review overview. First things first, we did this in alphabetical order. Sometimes there can be this sort of inherent idea that if you start with one, that's the best one. That's not how we order these. It's just by alphabetical to avoid that sort of presumption. Each slide has a summary of the program proposal, the program type, whether it's established or implementation, whether the staff assessment for eligibility criterion was passed, yes or no, the preferences addressed in the application out of 7 possible, a rubric score that the Grant Review Advisory Committee sent in earlier, and the applicant's total funding request. If you have clarifying questions, because there's a lot of applications, a lot of nuance here, please ask each other and ask staff. What we don't want is there are members who applied, or there are members of the applicant community in the meeting today, and this might sound pedantic, but it does become important. we don't want is an environment where members who applied feel like they have to now redefend their application live in a recorded public meeting. And we just want to manage that back and forth. So clarifying questions, please keep this within sort of the four corners of our grant review committee and our staff. And staff will manage this. Don't worry too much about that. So the approval process. This is the first opportunity today where we're going to need the grant advisory committee to discuss something. There's two ways you can do this: consensus, no official vote is necessary, or majority vote. So, some of the things about consensus is it can feel like, you came to more of a group agreement. It was less adversarial. Majority vote can be, feel like everyone got their opportunity to voice exactly what they thought about an application. For what it's worth, all of our other grant review committees operate by majority vote. That doesn't mean you have to. So I'm going to open this up to the grant review committee and just see what are your sort of first feelings about whether you'd like to operate by consensus or majority.
Is there a reason we can't do consensus and to a point and then vote if there's not consensus? Is there any prohibition to doing it that way, sort of shooting for consensus and then resolving by vote if we need to?
Elaine, that's absolutely fine. If the group would prefer to go that route as sort of a middle ground, absolutely. Aaron, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to make a very similar point to Elaine. We're on a schedule here. I mean, we have 30 to 35 minutes per application, and there's a point where if we don't have consensus, we're not going to have consensus, but we might very well find ourselves blowing past 3 p.m. So I would also vote for consensus being the goal and majority vote being the reality if we can't get to that goal within the time allotted.
I support that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Aaron and Simon. Are there other members who have other strong thoughts or questions?
Bridget, I also wanted to make note. I saw Ashley may have popped on into the meeting. Ashley Beatty, if you're here, do you mind saying so?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to pop off and then pop back on in about 10 minutes, but I am here via my cell phone for the time being.
Fantastic. Ashley, if you don't mind just taking a quick 2 seconds to say hello and who you are, what organization you represent, and what pronouns you prefer.
Yeah, Ashley Beatty, she, her, hers, and I'm the program manager of the Victims Assistance Program with the Deschutes County District Attorney's Office.
Thank you, Ashley.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. So it sounds like we're going to work with consensus until a point during the deliberations. If it can't be reached, we will go to majority vote. Is anyone on the grant review committee just strongly disagree with that? All right. Thank you, Elaine, for that super helpful suggestion. The second opportunity to make a decision is you can approve an application at the end of that particular application's review, or you can approve it at the end of reviewing all of the applications. This is not something you actually have to decide now if you don't like. I'm going to look. I think I need to mute someone. If folks could make sure they're muted, we won't get that. You don't need to hear me twice. That's way too much. Okay, great. So do grant review committees have feelings one way or the other about whether you'd like to wait to approve an application at the end of all of the applications being discussed, or would you like to go one by one?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I feel that, if we're all clear on the kind of the criteria that we're assessing to and the intent of the funding, et cetera, then it would be easy to review, to approve them or not, as we go through them. I think if otherwise we almost like comparing them to each other. if you kind of do it all at the end, which I don't know if it's more assessing the worth, validity of each one individually.
Great, thank you, Simon. All right, I see Tristan and then Elaine.
I agree with Simon. I think that assessing them one by one should be just fine, especially since we didn't get grants that requested amount over the amount that we have, so we don't really need to do that weighing and kind of dividing. So yeah, I would support just doing it one by one.
Thank you, Tristan. Go ahead, Elaine.
So I don't know, maybe you're going to cover it in a different slide or a different point, but is it a yes or no flat, or are there modifiers that we can have? There are going to be some interesting conversations, I think, about some of the budgets and some of the content, and I don't know if we're in a position to say yes if or yes but, and so I just want to know what the options are.
It's a great question, Elaine. So as the approving body, you have the discretion to say something like, you know, this application is great. The only problem with it is this piece. And if the applicant is willing to modify in this direction, we would approve, you know, their entire award or their entire award, this being modified. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. That, you know, again, because you are approving things to go to the commission. So does that help?
That's one part. The other one is whether or not we can request a modification of some aspect of it in order to approve.
So the answer is yes. The applicant. So what would happen is, let's say there's a program where, you know, there's I'm not going to come up with a great example. There's something about it where if they just modified a piece to maybe function a little bit differently or fund something at a higher level, or this is just not enough training for a new program based on our expertise, you really need this many hours of training as a minimum, that kind of thing. You can say, this is approved contingent upon the applicant, you know, bumping up their training hours or something like that. You can do that. So the thing is, the staff then gets to take that conversation back to the applicant and say, can you operate your program based on this modification? The applicant doesn't have to say yes. Maybe they just can't, something like that. So that's the one thing I would want everyone to be aware of is modifications. You totally have that discretion to recommend them for approval or contingency upon approval. But we still have to ask the applicant if they can do it. Does that help? Okay, great. All right, so our grant refreshers. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this again because our membership has gone through this once, but just so we're all on the same page, this became a program out of a House bill. It requires funded programs, center the experiences of those harmed, encourage those who have caused harm to take responsibility and repair harm, support persons who've been harmed, impacted community members, responsible parties, in identifying solutions that promote healing, including dialogue and mutual agreement, coordinating with community-based organizations, and programs that have an ability to work collaboratively with system partners, not limited to a couple specific entities. Eligible applicants are public or private entities. Public entity is any tribe, one of the 9 federally recognized tribes. Public bodies are state bodies, local governments, special governments, and private entities are corporations, trusts, organizations that are not a public entity or a system partner. Program types could be established or implementation. Essentially, if you're established, you're building on something that exists. If you're implementing, you're building something new. The next piece from the legislature, from the Restorative Justice Grant Program is where programs may operate. This was designed to be a front-end restorative justice program. So you'll see that green zone. This was in the RFP, I believe it was on page 5. So this may also go to juvenile or criminal adjudication systems, either one or both. And programs were allowed to be designed within these parameters. So they didn't have to take any one particular shape just within these goals. And last but not least, there were 7 preferences added in the administrative rules. Just as a sort of zoom out moment, not all programs can meet all of these preferences. So just as a reminder to everyone, if you see an application slide that says they met 5 preferences, it's not, I would encourage you to not necessarily think of it as a 5 out of 7. Because if you're the tribal government and your tribal court only has jurisdiction over misdemeanors, you are going to have a hard time meeting that preference for presumptive prison cases, which is not something that really fits into your program. Same with juvenile programs. So just try to remember that it's not a score, 5 or 4 or 6 out of 7. It's just how many preferences that program engaged with. And you can apply those preferences as you see fit. So the preferences are serving rural or historically underserved regions or areas, offering culturally appropriate services, partnering with research entities on program outcomes, addressing person felonies or misdemeanors, case types with presumptive prison sentences, funding for direct services to parties harmed or responsible parties, and not disqualifying participants on prior criminal history. And we did go over this, but when you're applying preferences, you want to be deliberate about it. So let's say, for example, just again as an example, if this grant review committee starts discussing things and there's this real strong sense that we really want to promote programs that have research capacity, you can do that. That's great. But just make sure that if you do also sort of encourage or support a program that doesn't have a research element over one that does. And this is, again, a little bit of a different circumstance because we do have more funding than we have request. If that were opposite, this gets harder. But we just need to make sure that if we're applying a preference, we need to have a good reason for it. It has to be based on something in the application. If you choose not to, we have to articulate a really good reason why, just for transparency and fairness. And I am going to, this is officially the application review, so we're more or less on time. After that, does anyone have any questions before we actually start talking about applications themselves? Excellent. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Casey and Rachel. They'll be walking you through the applications. We will all contribute, but I will not necessarily be driving any longer. So, all right.
Well, great. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Casey, and Rachel, did you want to take the demo or do you want me to take it over? I'm happy to.
I can take it, and then I'll go over kind of the overall review of applications, and then if you want to get into individual ones, that would be great. So this is just an application review demo. This is just to give you an idea of what you'll be looking at and the type of information that will be on each slide that Casey is going to cover. We did applicants, the program type, whether or not it's existing or an implementation. The proposal, we tried to pull just a short little blurb about the proposal and what the application is about and what they're trying to do. The service area, eligibility requirements, and how many preferences were met, the rubric score, and then their funding request. We also added referrals in there as well, so you'll get a good indication as to where the referrals are going or coming from, sorry. And then just a little bit of a table on program preferences with which ones were met, and so that you can see that as well. Just a reminder for conflicts, if there is a conflict with any application, just a reminder to mute yourself. Okay, and also I will say Casey is going to be covering the information on this slide. If there is Anything beyond this, if you need any more information that goes a little bit further into the weeds than what's on this slide, please direct those questions to myself and Bridget so that we can find those answers while you all continue discussing so that we can just continue with the flow of this meeting. So any questions on what you all are going to see on these slides? Okay, next slide. So this slide is just an overall view of all of the applicants and all of the pieces of the applications in terms of what was looked at and what is going to be reviewed today. So staff, if you remember our meeting back at the beginning of the month when we met and kind of set this meeting up, staff was in charge of determining eligibility, and we've determined that every applicant does meet eligibility requirements. And then we also indicated what preferences were met. There are a few that have asterisks, which Casey will go over what those mean. And then you all spent quite a bit of time looking at these, reviewing these, and providing a rubric score for each applicant. So we really appreciate your time with that. It was really interesting to kind of see that process and how it played out. So thank you so much for putting the time in the last couple of weeks to provide those scores. And then each funding request per applicant. So today, your all's discussions, taking into account the preferences met and the rubric score, is really just to decide funding requests and funding levels for each applicant. So this is just an overall picture. Like Bridget indicated, we are going to go in alphabetical order. And so the order doesn't mean anything in terms of best to worst. So we do want to stress that because we tend to order things in that way. So any questions on this slide? Okay, I'll turn it over to Casey then.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, let's get into this. So first up, in alphabetical order, we have the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians Peacemaking Court. This was submitted by the tribe, the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribes of Indians. It is an implementation program. So as a reminder, that means that it's building something new. The gist of their proposal is to stand up a community member-led peacemaking court, as well as to recruit and train the peacemakers to do so. Their referrals will mainly come from tribal court and tribal members at this time. They had discussed a possibility of entering into an agreement with Douglas County to seek referrals from them in the future, but that's not yet established. The service area is really the tribal trust lands of the Cow Creek tribe, and most of that is located in the rural areas of Douglas County. They did meet all eligibility requirements. Of the 7 preferences, we have indicated that they've met 5. The reason there's an asterisk there specifically goes to the preference of addressing case types that carry presumptive prison sentences. So tribal court only has jurisdiction over cases with a sentence of up to 1 year, so not felony cases. And although they do talk about the possibility of entering into some sort of referral, from Douglas County, at this time, it's out of their control. They do not, address any case types with presumptive prison sentences. So just 5 met for now, and their rubric score was assigned at 4.0, and their total funding request was $50,000. Are there any specific questions here? And I also invite discussion. Please feel free to unmute yourselves and share your thoughts on the peacemaking court application. Aaron, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I had a question about this one, and I think what it really reflects is my ignorance of tribal law. So, you know, there's the tribal court, there's the peacemaking court, and I was trying to figure out, you know, one of the questions we have to ask is sort of the extent to which this is or is not embedded in the system, right? And one of the criterion we have within the grant is de-emphasizing or disfavoring systems actors in favor of community actors. So I was just wondering about the relationship between the tribal court and the peacemaking court, or the peace in terms of, you know, is it statutory? Is there any supervision of the one by the other? Do they connect? Is one the community and the other one the equivalent of the judicial system? I had trouble teasing that out, and I have no independent base of knowledge on that. So that was a question I had. Thank you.
I also had a similar question. From my view, I really liked this application. I think that it's proposing to set up a really great program. I know that there are pre-existing peacemaking courts in other tribes, and I'm looking forward to, you know, there being more. I noticed that they had mentioned something about a peacemaking court code, but I didn't see it as an attachment to the application. And so I also would want a little bit more information, if that's possible, on just, yeah, the relationship between the tribal court and the peacemaking court. From my view, if there is a, you know, connection between the two that makes the peacemaking court not community-based, not separate from the tribal court, I feel like that should be something that could be potentially easily fixed. So my inclination would be to give the full funding request and to just kind of clarify and say, you know, it's our expectation that these are separate entities. One other thing that just kind of jumped out to me was on page 10 of the application. They wrote something along the lines of, you know, once someone has completed, then it will be encouraged, it will be encouraged that the case is dismissed. So it wasn't super clear if a dismissal is a guarantee on the end of this. And maybe that's just something I'm misreading and someone can just answer for me.
So I think, why don't I try to answer some of the questions first, and then I'll go to Elaine. So for the questions about whether they're an independent entity, I think one of the things that is part of this context is we read tribal-based, community-based organization as a tribe-affiliated organization based in the community, independent. I think there's a way you can view this, that the peacemakers are appointed by the court, but they are members of the community. And as an, and you know, we can ask for clarification on whether the code is separate. I didn't get any sense that there was oversight by the tribal court controlling the peacemaking court. We read that they were, you know, separate entities run by members of the community who are appointed by tribal court members of the tribal court judge. What other questions were there?
Oh, I just asked if dismissal is guaranteed upon successful completion of the program.
Yeah, Tristan, I don't think we have that off the top of our, I don't see a resolution of that in the application itself, but that could be one of those things where we can, you know, say, you know, this is required for funding. The case must be dismissed upon conclusion of the peacemaking court proceedings. Elaine, I'll go to you next.
I also liked this application a lot, and I'm excited about sort of expanding sort of these traditional practices with support. I had a similar question to Tristan about the encouraged to be dismissed, and I think we need to clarify that, what that means. And I didn't see any resolution in what I read that the judge wrote in support of the application either. A paragraph above that one, it talks about a written resolution that is agreed to as one of the outcomes of the process. But just the resolution of it, I think, needs to be sort of the final resolution. And so that was a question. The other thing I had, the mention of the possibility of Douglas County participating in in this, I think is really an exciting option to consider. And I know that there's not presumptive prison sentence in these, but some of them do have jail time associated with them. So I do think that they may be handling some more serious cases, and they definitely could build towards handling more serious cases if they did have that relationship. So some part of me all the way through this process, and especially looking at some of the budgets of some of the applications, which I know we're not supposed to do right now, but would this group consider pursuing that relationship formally with Douglas County, and would there be some benefit to giving them additional funds potentially to look at forming some kind of a collaborative planning process as part of this project, partly for the possibility of that, but also partly for supporting sustainability of this work beyond the year. So could they do some sustainability, some partnership development work as part of their funded time with this funding? And so anyway, those are just a couple of thoughts. I think if we can get that question answered about dismissal, or at least why we don't have it, I would be fine with moving forward on this and maybe even funding it higher.
Thank you, Elaine. Charlie?
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. I too love this kind of work. But there was some missing information for me. One was I felt like there wasn't really any clear outcome measures. So what kind of caseload can they expect, if any, was one of my questions. Another one was I felt that there was a little bit of ambiguity around processes used. They did mention peacemaking circles and other traditional dispute resolution methods, but they didn't really go into what those other methods were. And so just wanting to make sure that those other methods are aligned with restorative justice was a thought that I had. And then the last one was, it seemed like this was kind of, there was civil cases dispersed throughout this application that I was wondering if those are cases that would fall under this grant, or if it was just criminal cases. So those were my questions.
So Charlie, to your question about civil or criminal, the grant allows cases to be covered if they're juvenile or criminal. So we can clarify with Cow Creek's application that the funding is allowable to be used for restorative justice applied to criminal cases. The civil would have to be funded through some other lens. To your other question, and I want to make sure I get to all of. I want to make sure these are really good points. So remind me if I missed one or don't respond to one. One thing to keep in mind about outcomes is I think this is a really good place where you can suggest ways to strengthen applications. And one of the advantages of the Criminal Justice Commission as a staffed agency is we see this a lot. It's hard to, especially for new programs, especially for programs that don't have a lot of experience. And this is across the board. This is not just this particular application. With doing something like outcome evaluation, there's a lot of technical assistance we can provide to kind of get the outcome measures you're looking for. Sometimes grantees just aren't really sure as to what to build first. So I would, on that point, we can certainly ask for more clarification as to what they had in mind. But just as a caveat, that's something we can also assist all grantees with in sort of strengthening over time with input. Did I miss anything? I want to make sure
Bridget, I just wanted to add, in regard to the civil versus criminal case aspect of this application, It was, I think, in response in the very first response they provided, they mentioned that although the peacemaking court will accept both criminal and civil cases, this application was specifically seeking support for just the criminal aspect of that court. So Charlie, I think that answers your question regarding whether or not they were going to, if civil was going to be included in this grant, and that the answer is no.
I read that too, and then later in the grant they brought up the civil another couple times, so I was wondering. The other piece was the ambiguity on the restorative justice process, or the traditional dispute resolution methods mentioned without really clarifying what those were.
Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely something, if the grant review committee is interested, you know, the grant staff would be happy to like seek that clarification. I know from, you know, my personal knowledge with another peacemaking court, one of those cultural practices used, for instance, in the Confederated Tribes of Lower Umpqua, Coos, and Siuslaw Indians, they use sweat lodge practices, for instance. So outside of peacemaking circles, they have sweat lodge practice where it's a much more intimate experience as part of their cultural practice. But that's definitely something that we could inquire with Cow Creek to maybe elaborate on what cultural practices they would be using. And that might be something that you include in a contingency approval, for instance.
That sounds great. I just, what came to mind to me, and I know that this is not what they do, but I'm just like, you know, what if one of their practices is like caning or something like that? It's like, you know, I just want to make sure that it's in alignment with restorative justice. That's all.
Hey, Shirley, and everyone else. I just wanted to chime in because I know Michelle Burnett is on the Rules Advisory Committee. I don't know that she is here today.
She is not. So unfortunately, Michelle was no longer able to participate in the grant review committee, and we are so grateful for all of her hard work as part of the Rules Advisory Committee, but she will not be joining us.
Okay, well, that's too bad. She, of course, is a peacegiver through the Cookwill Indian Tribes Peacegiving Court, and I know that they have as well have a peacegiving code, and I don't know if they're the same code or if it's the same practice, but I know from speaking with her that their practice is just very community-based, very individualized, really seeks to meet the responsible party where they're at and address the needs that they have, and also kind of work through kind of a mentorship to help them understand the harm that they've caused, and they really kind of tailor it for each individual offense and the needs. And so I know just from learning about that it's a, you know, a practice that I think would be amazing to be replicated elsewhere, and this is potentially similar, but of course I don't know for sure.
Thank you. Simon, I believe you're next.
Yeah, some great comments and great questions. I support the funding of this request. I really echo Elaine's suggestion of talking, you know, offering them more money, saying, you know, if there was some additional funding, could that help with their sort of, you know, measurements, data collection, you know, outcome measurements, things like that. And also that clarify and the idea of could that sort of speed up the referral collaboration process with Douglas County to kind of link more with that even more formal system partner, which could lay the groundwork for future expansion. And yes, clarifying, I think it would be good to clarify that, you know, dismissal of the case, you know, through a, you know, an agreed resolution between the parties. And I think it would be good to ask, you know, what they mean by some of their other, you know, traditional, you know, approaches to, you know, harm reduction, the resolution process. But I think it falls pretty well within the intent of restorative justice in this grant funding to really be looking at community solutions, you know, as long as they sort of fit that restorative aspect to them.
Great, thank you, Simon. Elaine.
One of the things I'm noticing and listening to folks who know a little bit more about some of the practices happening in other communities, other tribal communities, is that, you know, I think where I was finding sort of missing information has a lot to do with this one person tailored approach. You know, it's very, I think it would be hard to ask them to say, I mean, it'd be nice to have sort of a little bit more information, for example, about the Native American Right Fund's peacemaking initiative and some of the background of that. We can certainly look it up. I can look it up and read a little bit more about that. But it does sound like, because it's really sort of tailored for individuals in terms of what their needs are and what the potential benefits are, one person at a time, it doesn't fit so neatly into the kind of grant application that we're used to seeing, where you just kind of lay out, if this, then this, and this, then this. And so I'm appreciating the kind of nuance of that very tailored approach. I was also, I know that they did mention, you know, their capacity being based on the number of peacemakers that they get trained up. But I also would have liked and would like to know more about sort of what their goals and thoughts are about that, you know, and it would be nice to know a little bit more about the caseload in the court that might be moved this direction. If they have access to that. It seems like they have a connection with their judge, but I don't know what the rest of the sort of infrastructure looks like. But it's a small grant to get something really powerful going. Is it enough? And maybe 50,000 is exactly what they need and want, and don't want to handle other things to get, you know. So it's more of a question than a suggestion. And are there ways that would make sense, because it is a sort of a part of a larger network of efforts around restorative justice, to get some ways to learn together about sort of caseload issues and training issues, and some having some knowledge sharing coming as part of this, rather than a demand, but more like a question about you know, what their hopes are, what their vision is, what their goals are, what kind of capacity they'd like to see for themselves, you know, without overlaying expectations about it, but just interest.
Yeah. Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions, concerns from members of the Grant Review Committee? I was taking notes as you all were talking, and was hoping to kind of like capture kind of the main points that, you know, you all are hoping to maybe see. So one of the things that was brought up was to clarify the encouraged to be dismissed language. What is exactly that? What does that mean? Another clarification that you all seek is what other methods that they're talking about, and if they align with restorative justice principles. And then lastly, as Elaine mentioned, maybe just getting a better idea of what their capacity might look like, what their caseload might look like. You know, of course, it must be difficult to assume, you know, what exactly that would be without having it stood up. But keeping, you know, those three things in mind, is there, yeah, Tristan, do you have another comment?
Oh, I think the fourth thing was just getting a little bit more clarification on what the connection between the tribe. Oh, no, I'm so sorry. You already answered that question earlier. So I rescind my comment. Sorry.
No worries. Did any other Grant Review Committee members have things that they wanted to add, or I'm not sure how you all want to go about this, but does someone want to, you know, say, hey, is there consensus? And it seems like you all are pretty, you know, positive, you know, feeling positive about this application. Tristan, you have another comment?
Real quick, Casey,
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add two things I heard to the list. What is a final resolution? Just getting some clarification on that. And then as sort of a future question, what, you know, what would need to happen to establish this partnership with Douglas County? What's the sort of possible path there? And sorry to interrupt. I just didn't want to lose this.
Thanks, Bridget. I guess I'm thinking about, you know, the interest of making sure that this, you know, money gets out the door and is be able to used with as quickly as possible. And so from my perspective, I think that what I would want to see is a full award of the 50,000 going to them, saying in the award letter that, you know, it's our understanding in making this award, and this award is contingent upon the final, you know, resolution of these cases being dismissal if there is a successful completion of the peacekeeping court. I guess in terms of like wanting to know more about their methods, whether they can establish a relationship with Douglas County and what their capacity is, those are all things that I think I would want to know if they're asking for additional funding, or if we're maybe soliciting them to request additional funding. But I would support just giving them the award, letting them know we have these other clarifying questions, and saying that the award is contingent on the dismissal, and that it needs to be returned if that's not what they're seeking to do.
I totally support those very wise words, Tristan.
I third. Yes, agreed.
Awesome. Is there anyone that has, you know, some other opinion that they want to bring up at this time? All right. This is kind of exciting. I think that everyone seems to be in support of giving them the full $50,000 that they've requested. The contingent upon that dismissal language, which grant staff will verify with them. And then, if my understanding is correct, as Tristan was mentioning, we can let Cow Creek know that we do have other clarifying questions, but those aren't necessarily contingencies for the $50,000 award at this time. Is that correct? Okay. Well, record timing, I think that we can go ahead and move on to the next application if everyone's ready. Thanks, Bridget. All right, so the next application is the Community Restorative Justice Program, also referred to as the CRJ program. This was submitted by the Center for Dialogue and Resolution Incorporated. It is an established program, so it is seeking money to build upon something that already exists, which is what they describe in their proposal. They want to expand their existing program. They want to increase the available supports and services for both harmed and responsible parties. They want to add staff to do so. Their main referral source is the Lane County Circuit Court. They serve, you know, primarily Lane County, and they did meet all eligibility requirements. Of the 7 program preferences listed in the application, they met all 7. Their total rubric score was 4.6, and their funding request was $339,700. A reminder, if you do have a conflict for this application, please mute yourself and don't participate in discussion. But I invite discussion at this time for everyone else. Charlie, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Short and sweet. I thought it was a very good application, and I have 0 questions. So in the interest of time, that's where I stand.
Yeah, yes.
Tristan?
Hi, now I'm realizing that you told us that we shouldn't just raise our hand and just jump in, but here I go. I agree. I think that this is a great application. I think it should be fully funded. I think just a couple comments. One thing that I noted is I think that there may, and I saw this across applications actually, I think there may have been a little bit of confusion with the question about disqualifying based on criminal history. CDR seemed to be answering that question for themselves, like would the Restorative Justice Agency disqualify based on criminal history, as opposed to what I think we meant, which is the referring agency going to be disqualifying on criminal history? And so I think that that may affect the preference piece, just what the answer to that is coming from the DA's office. But at the same time, I think that the application is great, and I would support the full funding. The one other question that I had, but I do think that this got kind of resolved in the letter that the district attorney wrote, or the victim services of the DA's office letter. There is a lot of talk about increasing the victim services, and in parts of the application, it wasn't clear to me if that was for all people who are considered harm parties, whether or not they're engaging in the restorative practice or if they're engaging in prosecution. But I do think that got clarified, and it seems like no, the funding will be restricted to the restorative justice services. So that was my read of it, which assuaged any concerns I had about funding prosecutorial endeavors. So I don't know if anybody else read that or had questions about that, but anyways, my thesis is I think we should fully fund this program.
Aaron, I see that your hand's up as well.
Yeah, I'm a hand raiser. I'll try to get out of that habit, but I had an adjacent issue to the one that was just raised by Tristan. Okay, so the idea that this is carrying presumptive prison sentences, I did feel like District Attorney Perlow's letter did not get me over that line. And one question I would like the program to be asked is whether they have to date admitted anybody who is presumptive prison, because their criterion aren't changing, right? This is an established program. What they say is in the last 2 years, cases referred have included crime categories 2 through 6 on the Oregon sentencing guideline grid. Well, the overwhelming majority of those are not presumptive prison. And there are some that are based only on grid block. And so I'd actually really like to know, given that if I remember correctly, at the low end of criminal history, even at crime serious level 6, those aren't presumptive prison. And so while it is possible, based on their definition, that they've taken somebody who is presumptive prison, it is also possible that they never have. And that to me is a salient question here, because I think that we're giving them full credit for that and in the 7 factors without knowing that for sure. So I would like actually to know whether they've ever admitted somebody who is presumptive prison. Thank you.
I second that.
Yeah, I don't know all those technical terms like you do, Aaron, but you saying that reminded me that I thought that I think it's a strong application. I completely think we should fund it. And I think we should ask them to push their boundaries, right? They've got a good track record of it working in exactly the way they've done and the way you described, Aaron. And then this should be an opportunity to take it to those cases that are going to be more challenging for the DAs to hand over.
Great, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Aaron. Is there any further discussion on that point or any other points?
One thing, I just want to clarify my understanding. So is the question about presumptive prison being raised as a contingency or as a program? Let's understand the program as well as we can. The thing I would add just for consideration is they're not required to meet all program preferences. So if perhaps this should be a 6 instead of a 7, that's one thing. I just want to make sure if the grant review committee is looking for a contingency here, I just want to be very clear on that.
I would not have it be a contingency. I would just like to know more about their program and have it be clear to them that, you know, a stronger application in the future would they could create a stronger application in the future if they were willing to actually address presumptive prison or show that they do.
And I'll go even a little further than that. Here's what I'm afraid of. The way that this is built, it could very easily operate in practice as just property crimes, where, you know, you're seeing stolen cars and identity theft and things like that being routed over, because all that they're giving us is the sentencing guideline grid categorization. And it says, it doesn't even say person crimes between 2 through 6. It just says crimes between 2 through 6. Most of those are property crimes. And so I would not want to give the money to Lane County if we're collectively assuming that they're doing presumptive person crimes, when this is actually built in a way that we don't know for sure that it's that. So for me, this is actually a pretty big question. Either they're hitting the mark directly or they're way off. And I don't want us to end up paying for property crime diversion, thinking that that's not what we're doing. So for me, getting that question resolved is actually kind of a big deal.
I would endorse that.
I don't mean to be a pain. I just want to, again, so is the question or the proposal that if, let's say CRJ is only serving a property crime responsible party population, does that make this group not want to fund them unless they expand that? Because I don't know that we can hold a preference in a contingency fact. They're not required to meet that preference. I'm happy to get clarification for the future of the program. Does that distinction make sense? Because to apply, they don't have to meet all the preferences to be eligible for funding. It just enhances their competitiveness.
Can it be an expectation or just a request, sort of, which is stated as slightly, you know, it's, you know, I think I'd like the funding. I think it, as you said, it meets the criteria, and the bill is to encourage the expansion of these RJ programs, and in the sense that they're meeting. I feel like I'm a lawyer now. It meets the letter of, it meets the letter of the law, but not the intent. I should go on trial somewhere. So, you know, can we say the intent of this is to push, you know, formal justice system partners to think differently and approach these cases differently, and therefore our expectation of you guys down in Lane County, you have a great track record of applying it more on property crimes. Now is the time for you to step it up. So our expectation is you're going to do that, not on everything, but that's our expectation. And in 12 months, prove to us that you have.
Yeah, Simon, I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tristan.
Oh, no, I was just going to echo what Simon said. Frankly, if this application had come through and they had been upfront and said, we're really at this stage only addressing property crimes, I would still think that this is an eligible application that should be fully funded. But I agree, I want, especially for a program that has been in existence for such a long time, you know, that is well developed, they certainly have it at their fingertips to be able to expand this into more serious crimes. And so, though I think that we should give them the full award, I also would at least want to give them some indication of what our review of this application was and our expectations and hopes for the future.
Thank you, Simon and Tristan, and Aaron for the comments. What I am hearing is this is not phrased as a contingency. It is sort of a progress for the future. Let's see the possibilities of one, clarifying to make sure that we do understand it right, and two, encouraging this program to step outside the property crime boundary, if that is in case the current boundary. But that is not a contingency for their full award, correct?
Close. In addition to the property crime, person crime distinction, I'd add the prison, non-prison distinction. I think some of my concern is just vested around the idea that even level 6 offenses are not necessarily presumptive prison.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Would it make sense? You know, again, it sounds like you all are in favor of this application. You're looking forward to fully funding them. For grant staff, should we maybe pose this as, here is the feedback that the grant review committee provided regarding your application. They'd like to see this. They have questions about this. Would you like for us to pose it in that way?
I'd be satisfied with that.
Okay. Awesome. Seeing thumbs up, Tristan?
I agree with that as well. And I wanted to say something to the committee just as kind of just something to keep in mind. You know, when we talk about presumptive prison cases, even despite the way that it sounds, that doesn't even necessarily mean cases that if they had gone through the formal criminal legal system would end in prison. Many presumptive prison cases end in probation. And that is either because the district attorney agrees that, yes, this is a case that should go to probation and that's the result, or because they get convicted and then there are arguments made in front of a judge and a judge agrees to give probation. So really the only, you know, cases in which prison is going to be guaranteed is when people are convicted of crimes that have mandatory minimums attached to them. So, you know, even if Lane County expands into presumptive prison, they still may not be touching cases that would actually have gone to prison if they had been resolved. I just say that as a kind of informational piece, not really a comment on this application or any of the other applications, but just to kind of ground us in that kind of understanding.
Thank you, Tristan. Are there any other comments or questions or concerns before we move on to the next application? Right now, my note says, hey, we're fully funding for $339,000, $700, excuse me, and we'll be providing feedback on behalf of the grant review committee to this group. And, you know, something to keep in mind if there's continued funding for restorative justice programs in the future, maybe revisit this and see what kind of progress they made. Great. Bridget, do you mind moving on to the next slide? You're there. Never mind. Thank you. All right. So, Conflict Artistry Community Restorative Justice Program. This was submitted by Conflict Artistry LLC. It is an implementation program. So again, they're building something new. Their proposal is to stand up an entirely community-based pilot restorative justice program. Really, you know, start making those partnerships with community service providers and community members. They hope to, you know, seek referrals from community providers, from individuals, self-referrals to the program.
You've
They'll
moved on a
serve.
slide. Can you go back?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
I clicked on accident.
No worries. Thanks, Simon, for pointing that out.
Yep.
So this is a unique program because although they do, like the actual providers for this program reside in Lane County and one's in Lincoln County, one's fully remote. And their service area does, you know, capture Lane and Lincoln counties. But they made note that they're virtually accessible. So they offer virtual services and therefore would be accessible to all parts of Oregon. Regarding program preferences, they met 7 of 7. The rubric score was 2.7, and their total funding request was $203,675. So I would turn it over to the GRC for discussion.
I guess I can kick us off. So I'll be honest, I'm very surprised to see that this application was deemed to have met the eligibility requirements. I thought that the application was very well written. I thought that the experience in restorative justice was clear. And I think that it sounds like a really interesting program that does not fit within the requirements of the bill or within the requirements of the rules. For one, it's not proposing to be an alternative to prosecution. There's no commitment from any law enforcement agency or from any district attorney's office to have an agreement not to prosecute this or to charge it. Even within the application itself, it says that there would still be the full ability to go through the criminal legal system, even if they completed the program. And so I think that it just misses the mark in terms of how we've defined restorative justice. And I also think it misses the mark in terms of the ability to collaborate with system partners. Comes from what I see from the application, there's no demonstration of that ability. So I would not recommend funding for this application.
Tristan and folks on the eligibility piece, one of the tough parts about this, the wording of the bill is that the programs have to demonstrate an ability to work collaboratively. It doesn't say what demonstrate means. The rules in the RFP didn't require letters. So we looked for, did this application demonstrate any capacity or willingness to do that? And they do express that they would. It is definitely on their terms, but I couldn't find anything that expressly excluded them from this eligibility because we didn't, there's nothing I can find in the programs that defines collaborating or proving how you're going to collaborate in a way that makes them patently ineligible. They didn't miss some letter that they were required to submit. Now, whether you all feel like it adequately answers that question is a different story, but eligibility, just nuts and bolts. We do err on the side of folks being eligible so that programs can get reviewed. But just so you're aware, that's where this eligibility came from. They do say, we will work with select system partners who are up to speed on restorative justice. Again, I understand that that's somewhat limited. It does put that on the group to get to decide what that is. So that's, point of discussion, but just in case you were wondering, that was our background. I see Charlize's got a question.
Yeah, questions, couple comments. I agree with Tristan. I did find this application somewhat problematic. And some of the reasons are the same as Tristan's, but I also have additional concerns in that I think there's definitely the need for restorative justice in non-system. I think this is kind of ingenious in that, such as, the homeless community where they don't really want to interact with any kind of community that doesn't want to interact with systems partners, and yet still need support around restorative justice. My concerns were that sometimes what can happen when when there's no oversight for something like this is when true crimes have been committed, that there's no like accountability here, where these other applications, because referral sources are coming through systems partners, and so there's the opportunity for dismissal from prosecution or a record. there's still that piece of accountability, whereas with this organization, this application, it doesn't seem like there's no there's not a lot of reason for some people to participate unless it's just really what they want to do. And you know, what if it's a rape or, you know, a serious assault or something, and it's going unreported, and the level of I have a concern about just the level of expertise on who decides what's eligible for this and what isn't, and you know, what if it does rise to a level of you know, say there's a problem community member that is, you know, going around just beating people up or whatever, and trying to handle it privately when I mean, I think that our justice system is grossly overburdened, and the focus or the outcome a lot is not restoring people back into the community or into just even on a trajectory of a successful life. But then there's people who the justice system actually exists for, and I am concerned that this does not really speak to how they're going to handle some pretty, you know, some stuff that may normally go unreported by communities that do not want to be involved with system organizations. So that's one of my concerns. Another concern I had was that they mentioned that the Center for Dialogue and I think it's Resolution, which is already a grant that we've reviewed and agreed for funding, was going to be a referral source to them. And I was confused on that and how they would have referrals from this organization, and yet that organization is providing these services. So I was a little confused on that. Also, many of the things that they mentioned in their grant were civil issues and not criminal issues, which I know that we've talked about, that they would only be eligible for criminal things. However, do they have a clear understanding? Does the applicant have a clear understanding of that? So those were kind of some things that came up for me in regards to this grant, beyond the fact that it doesn't really show not just that they didn't make create relationship with a systems referral source, but I kind of felt like, or interpreted like, that was kind of something, I think that I felt like it was something that wasn't even part of their value system, that they were trying to avoid the system completely, and kind of taking that approach. So those are my comments.
Hi, Shannon, looks like you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I would echo what Tristan and Charlie said with their concerns, but I kind of read it a different way. To me, the way I read it, it just seemed like there was either a lack of understanding or just like a lack of effort as to who the partners would be within the community. And so I think that this organization maybe has a little bit more kind of groundwork, like foundational groundwork to do. To understand the communities that they're going to serve. But that's how I read it. I just thought that there just wasn't those connections, not that they were trying to avoid it, but they just didn't have them at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really innovative proposal. I think it's ahead of its time. Oregon isn't quite ready for this, and it isn't. I don't think it fits the kind of the intent again of the bill that was passed, and you know, if we're talking about system diversion, is because it doesn't have these formal system partners. I read it as a proposal, you know, it's creating something that doesn't exist or that hardly exists. Maybe it does a little bit, and to very much be a real kind of alternative to the actual system itself, our formal system, criminal legal system. And for people, it would be much more kind of about community self-referral. I have been harmed, or I'm harmed, I'm a harmer or harmed party. And so that could be addressing lots of harm in the community that people are afraid or don't want to, or whatever reasons, you know, don't trust the system to go to get resolution to. I don't think that's the immediate intent of what we're trying to fund right now. It could be something that maybe goes into the bucket of other types of funding opportunities. Maybe they do a different type of proposal about how would you even create this kind of infrastructural model. But I don't think it's the right fit for what we're trying to fund, you know, in this immediate round.
Thank you, Simon. Aaron, go ahead.
And I'll pile on. I also had this in the do not fund for a lot of the reasons that were already mentioned. You know, Bridget, I appreciated your comment about how we don't require MOUs from system partners to demonstrate the capacity of the organization to handle presumptive prison cases or felonies or person misdemeanors. At the same time, I do believe that House Bill 2204 was about trying to lower the criminal justice system footprint in favor of community-based resolution, and I just don't think this does it. You know, it's very easy for me to imagine that a case that somebody tries to enter into the restorative process could still become the subject of a prosecution because the system partners just don't factor into this at all. And they're not a designated referral source anywhere in this. There's no indication in their model even that they want to partner with the system. In fact, what they say is that they generally don't want to partner with the system. So I agree with Simon. I think this is an innovative proposal that would be wonderful for a grant that is different than the one we have in front of us.
Thanks, Aaron. Is there anyone else that hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet that would like to do so? Right. Thanks for dealing with some awkward silences here. I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to, you know, take themselves off mute or get up the courage to speak in public. It can be kind of intense. Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts and your comments and your concerns. Bridget, feel free to help me out here with, you know, what you're hearing, but what I'm hearing is no funding. I, you know, hear that you all have concerns about their, you know, what their ability or desire to work collaboratively would be, kind of like a lack of understanding of who even the community providers would be. And yeah, is that the consensus that you would all choose to not fund this program?
I wouldn't quite, I don't think I'd phrase it like that. I think it doesn't demonstrate enough formal system partnership and therefore the potential for formal system diversion. You know, the alternatives to prosecution, conviction, and incarceration. I think I think it's more that is probably the main point.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, that's helpful. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to that?
Yeah, this is Vanessa. I had a question about this one. Is it, because I read it as if it was completely outside of the criminal justice system, so that both participants had decided to divert the process, both the person causing harm and the person harmed. Did I miss something there?
No, I think that's okay. I believe that's pretty much their intent.
Okay.
If I could just jump in. So two things to that point, Vanessa. I think that you're right that it exists without the criminal legal system. I don't know that it actually rests on a requirement that the harm party agrees not to seek prosecution. There's a section that says that they would still have full legal ability to do so if that's what they chose. And I think the other thing that is kind of came up for me in even thinking about that process is it isn't actually a harmed party's choice if the case gets prosecuted. And so I think if that was possible, then I would, yes, totally be in support of this application. If they were saying that they could create an agreement and it would never be prosecuted, never touched by law enforcement or district attorney's office, amazing. The problem is, I think that someone, two people could go through this process fully saying, we want this to exist outside the system. And a police and district attorney's office could say, that's nice, but we're still going to prosecute this.
Okay, thank you.
On mute there. Are there any other thoughts that folks wish to share at this time? Any other concerns? All right. So consensus to not fund a conflict artistry community restorative justice program. And Simon, I really like the way that you put it. Because it doesn't really demonstrate that formal system partnership and therefore no demonstration of formal system diversion. Is there anything else that the GRC would like to add to that before we move on to the next application? All right.
I guess,
oh,
sorry,
yes,
I guess, we could, as a suggestion, we could say that for future, funding, if they are able to secure partners, system partners that are willing to, not prosecute these cases, then, they could, potentially apply for future funding. I just don't want them to think that like the door is completely closed or that this application was like bad or something. It's just, missing a critical piece. And if they are able to fix that part, then, I would expect that we would really strongly be considering funding.
I like that, Tristan.
If I may suggest just a way of phrasing that, the grant itself, I know that there's a lot of backstory on intent, but the grant itself, it does not require a formal partnership. So I think what I'm hearing collectively is that this application did not adequately address the collaboration piece, how it would work, the referrals, based on the reality of the parallel system that does in fact exist. Is that a fair summary of that without relying on, formal partnership? Just because I can't hold anyone to, you must partner, because nothing so far requires that yet. Rules can change, but does that help at all? It helps me a little bit if folks agree with that.
That helps me a lot because I didn't think that a formal partnership was required. So thank you.
Bridget, that sounds good to me. I think, I guess I would say two things. One, I think that my read of the word ability in terms of an ability to collaborate with system partners would also indicate that not just a willingness on the part of the group that is applying, but also some indication that there's also a willingness on the part of a system partner. And that's where I see this application lacking in the ability to collaborate section. The other thing I would just lift up is that it just is, I guess, the definition of restorative justice as we have it, because I don't see this application as meeting that definition.
Great, thanks, Tristan. That summary is more actionable for staff. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the next application if everyone's ready. So the Deschutes County Emerging Adult Program, referred to also as EAP, was submitted by Deschutes County District Attorney's Office. It is an established program. Oh, Shannon, I'm sorry. Did you have another comment before I move on? Apologies.
If we're a little bit ahead of schedule, would it be okay to take our break now before we start the next one? Like just take a quick 5 minute break?
I don't see a problem with that. CJC staff, any issues? Hearing none. All right, let's go ahead, take a short break. Yeah, 5 minutes sounds good. We can still, plan for a longer break later. We'll see everyone here. Let's see, 9:45. We'll see you back here. Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, just coffee,
All right, welcome back. We'll wait just another couple seconds so I see a couple more videos pop on. Not that you have to have your video on, but it was a good indicator for me, at least, that people were around.
It's nice to see each other.
Yeah. All right, I'd say it's safe to go ahead and get started again. So, Deschutes County Emerging Adult Program. I'll go ahead and start from the beginning in case anyone had totally checked out and needed a coffee break. This was submitted by the Deschutes County District Attorney's Office. It's an established program, meaning it's building on something that already exists. Their proposal is to redirect young adults and responsible parties and harmed parties out of the criminal justice system and into a restorative justice alternative. If I remember right, the young adults here were 24 and under. The referrals are from the district attorney's office. They serve Deschutes County. They met all the eligibility requirements of the preferences met. Oh, I'm realizing that our slide has some differencing. Believe it is 7, but I can, have Rachel and Bridget double check that. So sorry for that it says 6, but it should be 7. The rubric score is 3.0, and their total funding request is $935,978.72. Is there any discussion on Deschutes County's EAP?
I'm happy to kick off some thoughts or questions. And I'd asked this of the CJC staff, kind of via email. So I know the DA's office is an eligible applicant, but it doesn't feel as much as it's community-led. And I guess would have rather see that one of the community partner organizations was kind of in that driving seat in some ways, or that it felt like it was maybe more equal in their program design and things like that. So I don't think it's no, we shouldn't fund it, but maybe some clarification there or some way of asking that of them. And I don't know if that has been followed up in any way, if that's something that's already been answered. I mean, I don't know because I don't run these programs, and I feel it's a little heavy staffed on the district attorney's office side. And I couldn't quite understand if the community organizations, if they were hiring new staff or if this was funding existing roles. So that's where I'll stop for now.
I guess I'll just jump in. Yeah, I'm going to ditto everything that Simon just said. Of the applications, this one seemed the most systemsy. I don't quite understand the interplay between talking about budget and talking about the application, but the budget request is overwhelmingly systems partners, and I couldn't quite get my head around on this one the extent to which this continues to be DA driven or heavily DA informed throughout the process rather than controlled by a community organization. So I also had questions about the extent to which this is fully restorative in the sense that it leaves the criminal justice system and goes out into the community, or if it stays a sort of DA and DAVAP managed and triaged dialogue where the DA is sort of more involved in the restorative meetings and has access to more of that information. Like Simon, this is not a disqualifier for me. It was more a structural question that I couldn't quite tease out from the application. But given how much money they're asking for systems partners, I think it's a pretty salient question in terms of how much how many resources we actually make available. I also would have found it a much easier call if more of those resources had been going to the community.
Yeah, I share a lot of that feedback. For me, it is a question of eligibility, at least for half of this application. From my view, the part of the application that says that cases will be removed from the system and sent to community solutions is great. I mean, I was really excited to see Deschutes' application. I think they have an awesome system set up for referring cases to RJ. I love that it is a pre-charge model. I think that that is incredible for reducing touch with the system. The part that was I think just really fell outside of the requirement that this be a community-based alternative was the indication that the cases where there's a corporate victim would be handled within the DA's office. And it seems like DA staff would be handling those. And so my inclination would be to fully fund the portion that is going to the community-based organization to no, I don't want to say, so I guess what I would want is to reach out to Deschutes and say, if you can just make the corporate victim process community-based. I mean, frankly, just send the money that is being requested for the DA's office over to the community partner, shift that process to the community partner, and then, yeah, fully fund the program. But I would want to see that happen and more effort towards becoming community-based.
Yes, yes, and yes. Really the very same experience reading this. What kept coming to my mind is that this seems like a DA's office diversion program with some community connections for some subset. And it's very expensive. One of the things that would happen if they did what Tristan just suggested is that $410,000 wouldn't be as high. You know, the cost, you know, it would reduce the cost, but that's a significant amount of money for the DA's, you know, $109,000 for an in-house, in-district attorney's office victims advocate. Those are really important positions to have funded for a DA's office, but I'm not sure that that is what makes sense for a restorative justice project. So I really like the way you've sliced it, Tristan, with, you know, taking what is really clearly the intention of this funding and funding that, and then putting a stop to the focus on the system that this grant has. And I don't know how to do that, but I liked your suggestion a lot. And that's better than where I was feeling like this just doesn't cut it. You know, so it does splice it in a way that I think gives credit and possibility to the restorative justice aspects of this. I also was very worried about how much interface the information sharing provided here. I mean, how much information sharing and I did not end up feeling confident that information was going to be protected, that processes were going to be protected in terms of the information flow. I'm worried about that with this project a lot, because it seems like it's trying to do two things at the same time. And one is keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening and knowing everything that's going on, because the DA keeps their hand on it. At the same time, sort of suggesting that we're offering this alternative to that. And I just don't think you can do both. I think they are mutually exclusive. In terms of the definition of restorative justice, that is in the intention of this funding. So, yeah, I have big concerns about that. I did not end up feeling confident about that. Even that they would be able to, not just that they wouldn't want to, but that, or even that they wouldn't want to sort of do that separation, but that the way they have laid it out, it wouldn't be possible. So. This one's very expensive and very worrying.
I have a question for the grant review committee. One of the challenging parts of, I mean, it's interesting. I don't mean to sound like it's just a challenge, but the definition of restorative justice, it doesn't give us specifically, you know, what tips the balance between community-based enough versus two systems-based. And that's fine. I think, you know, my 2 cents is that to try to define that would be really challenging, because lots of programs are going to do things differently. So I guess what I'm hearing from you is this looks too systems-based. And Tristan, your suggestion about like this, you know, the contingency to make available is really helpful. I got that written down. But just as like a global, is this the kind of program where you can fund any system actors? Yeah, that's kind of a question I have. It's like, is this too much because it's 3? Would 1 have been more palatable? Just as I would just like to hear from you all on your sort of barometer of systems versus CBO based.
Well, it's all one. It's the Deschutes District Attorney's Office. There's 3 different sort of players and roles in there, but it's one. It's only one office. It's just that, you know, I mean, there may be some of these questions in some other proposals as well, and that is the degree to which this is, I mean, 1.5 FTE is not a huge amount of time for somebody to focus on, or for several people to focus on getting the right people into the restorative justice program. So sort of that way of answering that question is, you know, maybe not, maybe 1.5 FTE is a reasonable sort of structure to have focused on getting folks to the right place with the right support. But the way the rest of it, so just the budget, no, that's not, I don't think it's that tips it. But the way it was written around sort of hanging on to so many parts of the process for so long and potentially permanently, it just didn't do that sort of rerouting of people away from. So I wouldn't do it on the first thing that you said, but I would do it on the second thing, which is it's not clear that there's a separation and a redirection of those cases away from the system. If the system is using that money to pay for rerouting and redirecting, that's a fine use of it, but it doesn't sound like that.
Thanks, Elaine.
I mean, that's Elaine's take on it, so.
I agree with Elaine. I think the way that I would maybe propose dealing with this is allowing for the funding for the community partner, and then putting on hold the funding for the district attorney's office, and basically asking 2 things. 1, clarify what funding for the district attorney's office is necessary to make the community-based approach work. Like, I don't know within the request that they made how much of that funding is supposed to be going towards this corporate victims circle facilitation, how much of it is just like the administrative work that needs to be done to be able to refer things out to the community-based program. And then the second thing that I would want from them is to explain how they are going to address this issue of community-based, and, you know, letting them know that if they're saying they're going to be doing this, you know, corporate victim circles within the district attorney's office, that will not be eligible, but they can change that. They can send it to a community partner, and then they will be eligible. And then we would certainly, you know, consider really, you know, sending the rest of that funding to that community partner. Or I guess the DA's office has kind of structured themselves as a path through in this application.
Thanks, Tristan. That's super helpful.
Does anyone else have thoughts around the application or around Tristan's proposal of how to respond to this application? Simon, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, Tristan, I like how Tristan framed it. I think that's kind of how we should lead. And yeah, and maybe it's the additional question of, you know, maybe it's I didn't really get a strong sense of the voice of the community partners. And I feel like I'd like to hear more from them. And it doesn't mean they have to be the lead applying applicant, but more than just, you know, in a letter of support.
Rachel, do you have an idea of what the funding breakdown would look like if we were to just fund the community partners? Out of curiosity.
Yeah, so from their total, let me get to it, sorry. Their total budget request was 935. We would be taking just the personnel, which would be about 410,000 would be held. A little over 400,000.
I just did this, Rachel. So your award would be $525,540. One thing that we staff will have to clarify is that admin. Oh wait, no, they didn't ask for admin. Never mind. Sorry about that.
Just how I heard that, the kind of qualifier there is, even to fund, even so, that's, yes, the budget lines for community staff and the partner agencies, etc. That's kind of easy to identify. We should also fund some of the DA's office capacity that will be needed to make appropriate referrals through to those community partners. But it's hard to, they need to, I guess the question for the DA's office is to pass that out. If we're only funding this aspect of the program, how much of your own staff capacity is needed? And that they can come up with that number. And then the follow-up to Tristan's part is, if you're then also diverting over these corporate cases, etc., does that then maybe refund the entire thing? That kind of validates that so much of their DA's office staff is needed. Although I think ask that question is quite so much needed, just in general. If we're, and again, particularly if we're passing over, maybe I'm making up numbers, maybe 0.25 of the DA's office FTE, then actually that whatever funding is tagged with that should then go over to a community partner.
I think we're going to have to ask them. I think we're going to have to ask them. I mean, there's a couple of modifiers, really. One of them is, do they want to change the way the DA is engaging in this project so that they are handing off those corporal cases to somebody else, in which case they may need to change the budget for the community partner as well. If they did that, which it sounds like is the kind of minimum change that they need to make to be able to get some money into the DA's office, what would they need in terms of staffing to support that? And I think both numbers could change. I think the number to the community partners could change, and the number to the DA's office could change. And if I were in their shoes, I would be doing everything I could figure out to do to keep the whole budget, in some fashion, because it sounds like you'd be willing to give it to them. Right? If this, then this, wouldn't you? I mean, if you came back to me and said, look, if you would rewrite this part or do this differently than this, we would want to fund the whole thing. I would just be answering your questions and submit the whole thing again. So there's not really incentive for them to lower their budget in this way we're talking about it. I don't know that we care to incentivize them lowering the budget, but I do think if we're saying that we need to see that the funds going into the DA's office are being used for true restorative justice diversion and system detachment, you need to show us how you're doing that and what staff you need to do that. And so, I could see them making a case for that 1.5 FTE and doing it this way instead of that way. So I'm just saying, I think we have to tell them what it is that isn't going to fly, and have them come back. And so I don't know whether there's room in this process for that, or maybe what we are saying is really don't change any of this. That's the part we want to fund. Here's what we're not going to fund. Come back to us with a different proposal for that percentage of it. So I don't know the cleanest way to do it. Maybe Tristan's way of just keeping intact what they've already proposed for the community-based organization, and then asking them to come back with a proposal for maybe additional funds needed for community organization and a change in what the staffing needs would be at the DA's office is the only part we would want them to redo, rather than throw the whole thing back at them. I just think we can't tell them how to do that part of it.
I support that. That sounds right. And yeah, I guess that is a question for Casey and Bridget. If we ask them to, make these changes, can I guess, what is the process for us? And maybe this goes along with the later conversation that we're going to have about what to do with the supplemental funding. And there's a way to kind of make the processes align. But of course, you know, the intent is not to hold up the process. If they really need district money for the district attorney's office to make the entire program work, then of course we would want to know that soon and, you know, modify our proposal or our award. So yeah, just curious how that would work.
Those are really good questions and comments. So the way that this, so this body, like I know they've said this, but you get to approve applications. The actual funding approval is the purview of the commission. So as Tristan has described, the sort of hold funds for DA.1, clarify what's necessary, essentially point to explain how you're going to essentially make this more CBO focused pass, like Elaine was saying, some of this, you know, responsibility and oversight to the CBO rather than the DA's office. What staff can do today is, if you approve this application for funding, you actually don't have to give it a dollar amount today. You can say, we approve this for funding, but we need these questions answered. And based on those answers, the commission can say, well, they were answered, and based on the recommendations contingent upon approval from the advisory committee, they met them or they didn't. And then they can do the splicing and dicing. And also add to you that the commission meeting, you're all welcome to be there and provide your input as to whether you are, you know, satisfied with the answer you got based on your role as the approver of the application. So I hope telling you that you don't have to come up with the appropriate math today, like Elaine was saying, there's a lot to know about. Well, could they do it? Is there something that we just couldn't suss out from their budget sheet about what level of administrative support is needed, X, Y, and Z? So does that help at all, that you don't have to do that today?
That's really helpful and good to hear. The one thing that I would, I guess, advocate for is being very direct with Deschutes, that in order for us to be willing to fund the corporate victim circles, that it needs to be community-based, and they need to give an explanation of how that's going to happen. And I mean, I don't know if it's appropriate to propose. I mean, maybe it's just not appropriate to propose, but from my view, it seems like they could just easily shift those cases over to their existing community-based partner. But I don't know if that's our place to suggest.
They did do a very clear budget narrative. If you look under their personnel for the DA's office, the first half-time position is overseeing the EAP case management and that part. The second position is overseeing the case tracking and the day-to-day program coordination, and they're the ones doing the circles, the in-house circles, right? So we can see that that particular position is the questionable area by their budget narrative. So that's the glaring one, I think, and it is fairly clear. So I could see them coming back and saying it would be a very clear response to us. Either we just do not fund those circles happening, you know, in the DA's office, because it's just not, and then we can really clearly see that, or we could say, you know, move this out of your office, move that half-time position that's doing it and that work outside of the DA's office, and then we'll add that funding back to the community-based organization pie. I do think they've done a very clear line item for what is the glaring piece here. It's that number 2 position, and potentially number 3, the victim advocate position too, but I'm not, you know, that's just an unusual position to fund with this kind of project. So that first half-time position is all about the administration of the EAP program through the DA's office. That's really clear. So it's that number 2 and number 3 under the DA personnel that is needing to be answered for.
Thanks, Elaine. That's actually, that's really helpful to know. And I know that we don't have to, you know, say the exact award that we're going to give, But from the numbers that were provided by Bridget earlier, I guess I would advocate adjusting those so that the, non-problematic position is covered. And then we're just asking about those position 2 and 3.
So just so I'm clear, oh, sorry. I just want to reiterate this, funding for on their budget request, funding for CBOs, funding for the first position of personnel, and then getting clarification on position 2 and 3. Is that correct?
That's for the DA's office?
Yeah, the position 2 and 3, yes, but as it relates to the problematic areas in the program, not just the positions, but the areas where the DA is hanging on to the cases. So it is the funding, those line items in the budget, but it's also the change that needs to happen for the program description in that area as well. Yeah.
Go ahead, Shannon.
I just want to chime in before we're done, because I was also impressed with as far as the way that the application was put together and the clarity as to, where their intention was as far as where the funding would go. But I'm just really having a hard time getting past the fact that, essentially this grant will fund, it'll be filtered through this major player in the criminal legal process, and they're going to ultimately, is my understanding correct, they'll be making decisions ultimately as to where, once that funding's released, where it's going to be headed towards. So I guess I'm a little bit concerned, I just guess I don't understand enough about that process. How can we say that this helps move community, members of our community away from the criminal legal process when the funding is going completely through the prosecution? And I would feel the same way if it was a defense office. It's just, I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around that. And then as far as the message that we're sending as part of this group, as far as where restorative justice funding should be placed, I think it really it would send the message that it's just to kind of further the status quo. And we're just, I'm just really concerned about that. So I would like to see maybe the message be that if they can have a showing that there is more organization and structure, and that the funding recipient can be a community-based organization, and then they also are considered and then then they can put in as what they would need exactly in their office to participate in that community-based program. I would appreciate it that way rather than saying that. So I guess maybe we're saying the same thing. I would just like to see the funding being through a community-based organization with the DA involvement, and the DA involvement being funded through that. I hope I make some sense, but.
Shannon, I want to, just from the staff lens, I want to see if I can reiterate. Are you, the whole message sending, I'll leave that to the grant review committee, but so procedurally or administratively is a better word, the CJC, based on how this was applied for, the primary contract holder would be Deschutes County DA, and then their subgrantee, their DA's office would have a subcontract with Restorative, Community Solutions of Central Oregon, Thrive Central Oregon. Is your concern that you feel like it would be more appropriate for the primary contract holder to be the community groups who would then subaward to the DA's office as their involvement is necessary? Does that sound, I just want to make sure I heard you right.
That's what I was trying to say. Thank you so much.
Are there any other thoughts on, how to move forward with this application?
I just had a quick thought on what Shannon was saying. Shannon, I think what you're saying is the ideal. I think that that's what we want, is for community-based organizations to really be the drivers and for them to be submitting these applications with indication that they have support from system partners. And so I do see that as a weakness in the application, but I think that that is still allowable by the bill and the rules, because the bill says that this is for private and public entities. And so I would kind of suggest what we've already suggested before in terms of how to make the award, asking for clarification, asking for restructuring, and then to within that, just emphasize to them that, within the definition of restorative justice is community-based, is really elevating this community-based aspect, and that we would want to see the community-based organization as more of the driver, and perhaps for future applications they can consider, it might be wise to consider applying in a way that really centers the community-based application and doesn't have the system partner as a pass-through. But at the end of the day, this money, they will have to send it to the community-based organization. I also don't love that it's going through the DA's office, and the DA's office is so centered. But from my view, that to me does not impact what I would say the award should be.
Well, and to Tristan and Shannon's points, if this is at all helpful, I agree, Tristan, based on the rules in the bill, we can't require Deschutes to swap and be the subcontractor. But in the future, it's a future iteration of this program, you could add a preference or some sort of additional points to applicants who do make the primary applicant or primary contract holder the community-based organization. We just don't have that in the program at this time. Also, I love seeing your cat, Elaine. Big cats on screen fan over here.
All right. Well, is there any further discussion on, how to move forward with Deschutes County's application? Or is there general consensus that, moving forward with the kind of the proposal outlined by Tristan earlier with 1 and 2? Bridget, you had it really well written or summarized. If you don't mind repeating that for the group, that might be helpful. But if that's the way we want to go, great. But let's. Yeah,
I have my shorthand, and of course I will be re-listening to this after we're done. So the first point is to hold back the funding for the DA at this time for the first position. I'm sorry, for the second and third positions, to clarify what funding is necessary for the DA's office to facilitate this work with the CBO. The second point is to ask the DA's office to explain more of this, whether they would be willing to adjust their program to put the corporate victim circle with the CBO, not within the DA's office. And then that funding would, that program would be put out of the DA's office. Sorry, that was ineloquent. But if that covers the two general contingencies, we will re-listen to this meeting and get it 100% sounding better.
I think the third is what happens if they say yes or no to that second question, right? I think the third is, if they don't want to, then that doesn't get funded. And if they do want to, then the budget for the CBO may need to be adjusted. Yeah.
All right. Well, saw lots of heads nod. So if there's no one else who wants to make a comment at this time, it seems that we do have a general consensus on how to move forward with the emerging adult program from Deschutes County. So I think we can move on. Thank you, Bridget. All right, so the next application for consideration is the Lutheran Community Services Northwest Restorative Justice Program, as submitted by Lutheran Community Services Northwest. It is an established program, and they are proposing to expand the restorative justice services via a pilot project training to train Portland police officers to make referrals in certain cases. They expect the referrals would come from the Portland Police Bureau. They'd be serving the Multnomah County area. They did meet eligibility requirements. They did meet the 7 preferences listed. The total rubric score was 4.6, and their funding request is $430,031.90. Anyone want to kick us off? Aaron, go for it.
I'll go. First of all, I'm just gonna, for the sake of the record, I did not recuse myself from this one because I was not directly involved in putting it together, but obviously the Multnomah County DA's office is mentioned, so I just wanted to throw that out early on. I really like what they're trying to do here, though. It, for me, raised an issue about the scoring rubric more generally, which is, you know, they check all of the boxes. I was left with a ton of questions about how this is actually going to work in practice. This proposes to make hundreds, if not thousands, of cases theoretically eligible, far beyond any other pool that we've looked at. I mean, this covers everything from trespassing all the way up to presumptive prison repeat property offender offenses and beyond. And so that left me with a ton of questions about how the police are going to make the referral, you know, how they're going to train everybody up, how they're going to make draw distinctions between all of the different cases that might theoretically be eligible, and then how Lutheran's going to keep on top of all of the cases that come in and sort of, you know, partition what is priority because the supply is going to exceed the ability to parse it. That said, I mean, I love the idea. You know, this is completely before a case hits the criminal justice system. It's an opportunity to make it so that it never happens, so that prosecutor never even needs to get involved. It was just the sheer breadth of the thing. If there had been an ability to score this that just says, do you have a clear sense of how they're going to pull this off? I would have had a lot of questions. That said, as I said at the beginning, I really like this one.
I agree with Aaron on everything that was said, really liking it, kind of wondering how the logistics of this will work. Ultimately, I support fully funding this program. One thing that I noticed within this program and a lot of the other ones as well is it looks like a lot of programs are looking to rely on volunteer facilitators. And I wonder about that. I wonder about that in terms of being able to recruit enough people to be able to serve as those volunteers. I wonder about that in terms of being able to recruit a diverse you know, population of facilitators that will be able to meet the needs and the experiences of the people they're serving. And I also wonder about that from the perspective of trying to, you know, really create robust restorative justice services and create restorative justice as a really, you know, hopefully a fundamental part of the way that we start addressing harm in our society. And so I guess this is more of a point for, you know, when we start talking about what are we going to do with those supplemental funds, I would really like to encourage these programs to pay their facilitators or to at least have some paid facilitator positions, and then perhaps the ability to have volunteers as well. But, you know, I think that what we're seeking to do is really, you know, create professions in restorative justice to really, you know, strengthen this field and help it grow.
I really loved this application. There's a lot about it, partly the history, the historical sort of links that the organization has to the communities it's proposing to serve. I think the pre-contact, it didn't make sense at first. I kept questioning why not handle any mandatory arrest cases and certain other crimes, but they did a good job of sort of clarifying that this is really a pre kind of intervention. It is really interesting to see this juxtaposed with the other Multnomah County proposal, because there are two rather significant proposals coming from the same county. And how we think about that is going to be interesting to me. My sense is that they're going to be able to do what they say and do a lot with this much money, you know, in the direction that we're asking these things to move. But I have similar concerns in terms of the sort of the scope, and I'm also less clear about what the relationship between them and the district attorney's office will look like in practice. Like because it's the police can refer, but there's also a conversation about what's happening between them and the DA's office. So they say that because some of the crimes, we will collaborate with the district attorney's office and accept all cases they do not require be forwarded to them for review. So, I mean, maybe we don't want them to have more cases, but I was curious about that spot of not working with those cases. So I don't know. Some of the things you're bringing up, I hadn't thought as much about in terms of the first comments around how many referrals they might get, and then the system issues around not paying facilitators. I also wonder if they're going to draw from their current volunteer base that they already have to sort of, build on what they're already doing. And that's just the way that's their culture of the way that they do services. And so they're building on something that they know really well in terms of working with volunteers rather than paying people. So, yeah, just mulling it. But I really did like the proposal. I thought they did a good job of outlining what their hopes are.
I know we've got some. Oh, I'm sorry, Casey. I was gonna just pipe up about one thing in case it's helpful. So Tristan, you brought up we do have additional funding that hasn't been requested. It is possible that, and this is just an example, I'm not trying to tell you this is what your recommendation should be, but based on what you said, it is possible to do something like, we recommend in a supplemental round, the commission consider essentially earmarking funds to allow for awarded programs to transition volunteers to paid staff, or to create stipends for volunteers if for whatever reason the org doesn't have the capacity to create positions essentially. So you can recommend that some of the reserve funds or leftover funds go to that purpose. The commission gets to decide whether they do it, but I imagine your recommendations will be influential. And then I don't want to get in the way of the other hands raised. So I think we had
yeah, I think Charlene was up first. Charlie, I think you're on mute still.
You're correct. Thank you. I loved this application. I find it ambitious as well. However, if anybody can fulfill what they say, I feel like these people have the capacity and the history, so to speak. They do mention a maximum of 500 cases, which still seems like just a huge amount. However, they are also mentioning the desire for 35 to 45 more mediators, which is, so I feel like they're looking at it realistically.
It appears we may have lost connection with Charlie, unless that's just me. Does anyone else?
No, I can't.
Okay. Sounds great. Thanks for confirming, Simon. While we wait for her to hop back on and finish her thought, Ashley, you were up next if you wanted to maybe comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Elaine said. I thought it was a really great application. I can't remember who said the term, the pre-pre, but yeah, the pre-pre restorative justice approach. I would have loved to see or know more about how these will interact with the other application for Multnomah County. And so those were kind of my 2.5 cents.
Thank you, Ashley. And then I think I had Elaine up next.
Yeah, I'm just rereading the section of the kinds of crimes that they will accept. And, you know, when we were talking about some other applications, one of the things that we were suggesting is that they would focus specifically on the crimes with the presumptive prison sentence. And so I don't know if that's feedback to give them or if it sort of excludes some of what they're saying. We will accept cases involving felonies or misdemeanors as well as case types that carry a presumptive prison sentence. But I wonder if one of the ways to sort of be more, maybe less ambitious and less ambiguous would be to ask that this funding be used specifically on the kinds of cases that the proposals were to address here. I don't know. I mean, they do say they will, but it's this plus. And I think we've said in other applications that what these funds are to be used for can be more specific or more targeted. So I don't know if that's something that would be worth sort of asking for, and also that wouldn't address some of the very first comments about how wide and ambiguous this is.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. If I'm understanding correct, are you saying that you would rather them, you know, maybe focus just on the presumptive prison sentences, or not include those at all? Maybe I'm totally misunderstanding. I'm sorry.
No, I think the intention of this whole effort is to really keep people out of prisons, right? And so that was one of the big priority areas. And I heard us talk about that in an earlier application, that we were more sort of interested in, and it was more clear when people were saying that they would use this funding to keep people out of the prison system by focusing on cases with presumptive prison time with this funding. It didn't mean they couldn't do that in the rest of their programming, but with this proposal specifically, could we ask them to sort of narrow their focus, which might also keep thousands of, you know, untended cases from falling on them? I don't know. I'm just asking.
Elaine, I think I'm going to try to answer your question. Based on the rules, you can prefer those programs. I can't require it, but what we could do is just strongly suggest those that focus on the cases you just iterated or presumptive prison cases. And then one thing I guess maybe I should have brought up earlier for the grant review committee, advisory committee, you will be able, I mean, we will do ongoing progress interaction with all of our grantees for the duration of the program. So essentially we'll get to learn a lot. I'm not saying we shouldn't answer these clarifying questions now, of course we should, but it's not like this is the first time or last time that you will get to kind of see the setup. So for the questions about, is this breadth of cases just too much? How are they going to handle this? We will probably know a lot more, and they will probably know a lot more about the realities of those things once they've been up and running for 5 or 6 months. So I don't know. To your question, Elaine, we can prefer it, or you can prefer those cases. We can't require it. And then real quick, I know Charlie got interrupted in the middle of her thought. Charlie, did you want to finish before we continue with other comments?
I don't know where I dropped off. I think I made my point that I felt like they were, it was an ambitious application, but I felt that they were aware of that and had some ideas of how to address it. And I also think other things have been brought up since then, as far as like even suggesting limiting, their caseload to certain types of cases and stuff. So that's really all I had to say.
Great, thank you. All right, Simon, I believe you were up next.
Yeah. Again, I support the proposal. I think there's been a lot of really appropriate feedback and sort of the questions. I think the feedback to them would be, how could they talk more about narrowing just that kind of broad scope, that broad brush. I think LCSNW, they're an established organization and they have these types of established programs. I don't think I want to second guess what they think they can do, but it does feel pretty, there's an element where it could be overwhelming and ambitious. So I think if they could, give some more thought to how they would narrow that down, and this may be, I don't know, kind of a follow-up, and it ties in with the other Multnomah County application, is just how those two programs, if they're both funded, how do they interplay? And I wouldn't want somehow going forwards, what's exactly the cases aren't getting stuck here, but then pushed over there. And I guess the final comment I wanted to make, which maybe contradicts something certainly I said earlier, but it's not just about, obviously we want to 100% be diverting cases away from prison, incarceration, but it's also just as much, diverting cases out of the formal justice system. The more touch points people have in those processes is the potential for more detrimental impact on their lives. So, there's a need to, have less people going into courts, less people facing charges, less people facing prosecution, all those things that will have better social outcomes. And that I think the intent of restorative programs is to try and achieve those outcomes, not just, and obviously less people in metal cages.
Thank you, Simon. Aaron, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I did. I think one of the challenges we're having is, in Oregon's criminal justice system, the only charges that are automatically prison are ballot measure 11. Those are the ones where you go to prison regardless of your criminal history. That's the presumption. For pretty much every other type of charge, property crimes, minor felonies, it depends on your criminal history. And so with both this and the Lane County proposal, I think we run into sort of the same issue, which is, a lot of the people that are brought into both this program and probably Lane wouldn't be presumptive prison because their grid block says that they're not. They don't have enough criminal history. So if somebody has multiple prior convictions for an assault 3, they go to prison. If they don't, they don't. And so if Lane County or PPB make that eligible, if they say, hey, we're going to look at assault 3s, whether or not that's a prison case depends on the circumstances of the person involved. And where I think that's been a challenge for us is, it's hard to tell looking at this how many prison cases would be impacted. There'd be some in the property crime world, there'd potentially be some in the person crime world, but then there'd be a lot of other eligible cases that could never go to prison, either because the charge wasn't that significant or because the criminal history wasn't that significant. Again, the only lock and load definite prison charges are BM11. So I guess where I land on that and Lane, both of them, is this is a mixed bag, and this one has a higher ceiling than Lane did on crime seriousness. All they're saying is no BM11s, but you can get up a little bit higher on the grid block. But their floor is lower because this theoretically goes all the way down to criminal trespass. And again, this was the question I had at the beginning. I don't know how they're going to balance those. Are they going to favor more serious or less serious? So I would like to see us give them guidance saying that we're more interested in you doing more serious offenses, but I do think that with all of the non-BM11s, you're just going to run into a grab bag where it's both presumptive prison and not presumptive prison in the same populations.
Thanks, Erin. Elaine?
My last thought is that one of the most exciting aspects of this particular project is the relationship with law enforcement and the ability to keep folks who have other issues going on in their lives, including immigration status issues and other potential struggles coming into contact with the system, is a really powerful reason to fund this. You know, I think they have relationships in communities that we really wanted to prioritize, and doing some work where the Portland, I mean, I don't know how you could get a police officer to sort differently, because that's where the referrals are coming to. They may be able to do something at their end once folks come in their door. But the idea that Portland police would get access to this resource out the gate to be able to do sort of right and support by more people, I think makes this really exciting to consider and to watch and to see how it goes and what they discover in the project by doing it.
Tristan, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch base a little bit on what Erin was saying. And I guess just as a prerequisite to my comment, I do think that this program should be fully funded. Frankly, from my view, any program that meets the eligibility criteria of really what we're seeking to do should get the funding amount, since we have the money. And so, you know, for me, I'm just looking for what to make somebody ineligible, or where do I think an ineligibility should occur. So nothing I have to say has anything to do with my opinion on the award that we should give. But I do think that Erin raised a really good issue, because we are basically trusting the police, which is a phrase that always just makes me nervous to say. But we're basically trusting the police to equally address crimes that are, you know, of a serious nature, are the ones that we really want to address as they address, you know, lower level cases. And within this proposal, they could say, yeah, we're open to doing presumptive prison cases, and then direct all their efforts to low level misdemeanors, and it would still be within what they suggested. And, you know, I work in Multnomah County. I am familiar with other pre-arrest diversion programs that have been tested with the police department. And I'll say, I don't think that we can trust them to do that. So that's my concern and my reservation. Again, I think that this should be fully funded. And I love what they're proposing. And I hope that they do seek to really test the boundaries and use restorative justice to really its full potential. And so, you know, including that in the award letter, you know, our view that's what we want to see, I think is good enough for me. But yeah, I have a concern.
Tristan and Erin and other folks who have brought this up, I think, and this is a little bit of spontaneous thinking, so, you know, asterisk. We do grant reporting for all of our grantees. And one thing we haven't, I mean, this is still in flux and is still being designed, but we could ask for some sort of reporting on, you know, what was the nature of the police engagement. I don't know if we would ask them to supply an ORS or something where you would get some sort of sense for what was the basis for the, you know, the interaction that led to the referral to Lutheran Community Services. The intent being, well, over time, you could see, is this program really only focusing on misdemeanors as opposed to these other cases that you are requesting that they are suggesting that they prioritize. So that's a long way of saying, I think there are some ways we can get to that question and just see over time where these programs are actually funneling their resources and attention. And then next grant cycle, we can see, all right, we need to adjust so that programs are meeting this threshold as opposed to this one.
I really like that idea.
Thanks, Bridget. So in an effort to kind of, summarize what we've been hearing regarding Lutheran Community Services Northwest application, there are a couple things that you all have brought up, and maybe we can kind of hone in on these and summarize what feedback you would like grant staff to provide to this application. So something early on heard is, I think it was a comment from Aaron, like, how will referrals work in practice? Bridget's, quarterly reporting requirement may address that, of like, we could monitor it at least through the duration of the grant cycle. So that's something to consider. Let's see, how practical is the recruitment of facilitators? I know that Charlie made note that they've been mindful about, okay, they're having a maximum of 500 cases and they're hoping to recruit 35 to 45 more mediators, but in a volunteer capacity. And we discussed, a bit earlier about the possibility of this grant review committee making some sort of recommendation to the commission for an earmarking of funds, if that is something that you all are interested in making that suggestion for the purpose of, possibly transitioning those volunteer positions to paid positions, or making some sort of stipend for those positions. Let's see, another thing that was brought up is, how will this application interact with the other Multnomah County application? When I think of that question, I'm not sure if it's at this time we would know, or we could only assume of like how it would actually play out, but maybe that would be another thing that you all would want to remain mindful of over how it goes in practice. And then in terms of specific feedback that you all had noted to provide, would be a very strong suggestion to focus on the more serious sentences of presumptive prison cases. There's quite a bit of discussion, so I definitely could have missed something. Please feel free to pipe up and add to my list, or if anyone feels inclined to make a very eloquent summary, please feel free to do so as well. Again, like Bridget said, as grant staff, we'll be reviewing back this entire thing to make sure we have captured everything you guys have talked about. But Elaine.
Well, I just withdraw maybe the phrase presumptive prison sentence, but keep in the more serious crime based on what the conversation was. We are interested in seeing touch point, or keep away from prison, but it's really the focus is the more serious crimes. Yeah, I don't know if others agree with that, but it seemed like that's where the conversation went.
All right, I saw a thumbs up from Simon. Tristan, do you have a comment?
It would be great to know with the data if they are referring presumptive prison cases, but it would require a little bit more sophisticated data collection and kind of, calculating of whether somebody's on the grid and where they lie on the grid and that kind of stuff. So that may, I don't know, but that may be too onerous of an endeavor in terms of data tracking. So I think that yes, having a kind of like a classification of more serious crimes might be the best approach. I'm also, I guess I'm wondering what other people are thinking in terms of how we are making the award. Like, are these questions that need to be answered before we agree to make the award? Are we saying that we're going to make the award and then, and we want to know these things or have them think about these things? My inclination would be to make the make the full award, to require the data tracking, and then to list kind of our suggestions and concerns. But I'm certainly open to disagreement with that approach.
I think yes, Tristan, is what I would say. think if I'm thinking back to the Lane County and things, as we've said, we want to make the award, and we have these questions that we're requiring you to answer, but it's not, if I guess maybe the CJC has the problem if they don't answer them, then what happens? But, I think the impetus on us, and we want to get these programs funded if we think they meet the criteria and that they're appropriate. The idea is to get the money out there so that they can start doing the work, because we have this very short window of time. I wouldn't want things to delay programs getting off the ground, et cetera, or then people redeploying their resources, the staff that they've kind of got earmarked for this, to get it going straight away. And then but to require them to answer these questions or to prove that they're doing X, Y, and Z that we think will make their service better, stronger, more aligned with the intent. And I feel like that's how we have framed it with some of the other proposals we've reviewed before this one.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I just went back to my notes for the Lane County app, the CRJ program specifically. Yeah. And the way that we all kind of interpreted the GRC's decision on that was, yes, fully fund, but provide very specific feedback as to what your expectations were. So if that's something that you would like to similarly do in this case, as Tristan said, make the award, require that data tracking component, which, in a way is required of all grantees that would be receiving this award. But what Bridget, I think, was getting at is that we could work with our researcher, Michael, to maybe develop a specific question for grantees that would kind of get at, like, what's the basis of these referrals? Like, what's the intent here? What the exact sentence, et cetera. So require that data tracking component, which is required for everyone, but then provide that very specific grant review committee feedback that you all have stated today with, again, an expectation to really focus in on those more serious sentences.
I guess I want to, not to be a pain, I just want the group to understand that can be a strong suggestion or a recommendation, but we can't, there's no penalty if they don't meet, if they don't, this program ends up after 6 months of data tracking or reporting, looks like they are focused on misdemeanors, mostly, not the more serious crimes that you're talking about. We don't have a capacity to penalize them for that because it still operates within the four corners of okay. It would be for you to know, kind of going forward, learn how to adjust the program overall to make it more specific. Maybe the applications have to call some of these things out. And then we would learn about sort of their progress overall. I don't want anyone to feel like we have more latitude to control a program within the sort of broader context than we really do. But we can certainly pass along the suggestions and see how programs respond to them.
Thanks for that, Bridget. That makes sense to me.
That does, and when we later on talk about supplemental funds and I have some ideas on that that could possibly address that in some way.
Great. Well, thank you all. I believe that's consensus then, moving forward as stated, with fully funding, making that award recommendation for the commission to authorize, and providing that feedback. I want to be mindful. I know on the schedule we had like a longer break scheduled for around 10:30. Does anyone need that right now? And we were, I think, anticipating breaking for lunch at 12:30, Bridget, I believe was the time. So that's about an hour and a half away. What are our thoughts? How are we feeling?
I personally would love even if it's just now, a 5-minute bathroom break.
Yeah, that sounds great.
But I'm happy with a shorter break right now and to keep going. and then maybe we possibly break for lunch at 12 as opposed to going all the whatever, but yeah.
Looks like grant staff are amenable to that. GRC members, do you have any other comments?
I'm down for a break. I just wanted to say, for some reason, my screen is frozen. So I'm gonna leave and then come back, but I just wanted to let you know I'd come back.
Thanks, Ashley. Appreciate that. Sorry about your screen. All right, well, I saw head nods. Let's go ahead, break now. We'll come back around 11 a.m. and yeah, plan for an earlier lunch break around noon. So see you all in about 5 minutes. Welcome back, Elaine. We're going to give folks a couple more seconds here to hop back online and look like they're back. All right, looks like we have the majority of folks back in, so we can go ahead and move on to the next application. Quick status update. It appears that we have gotten through 5 of the 9 applications, and the time is 11 a.m. So, wow. But well done to all of you, and thank you so much for your very thoughtful, input and questions and concerns that you have raised so far. So, in the spirit of marching on, the Multnomah County Restorative Justice Alternative Program was submitted by the Insight Alliance. It is an established program where they proposed to pilot a pre-indictment restorative justice alternative for young adults in robbery 1 and 2 and assault 2 cases. They would seek referrals from the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office as well as Metropolitan Public Defender. They intend to serve Multnomah County. Of the eligible, oh, sorry, did someone? Nope, okay, sorry, pardon me. I thought I heard something. They did meet all of the eligibility requirements of the 7 program preferences. They met all 7. Their rubric score was 3.2, and their total funding request was $1,087,049.11. Did have a couple of notes for conflicts here, so just a reminder, if you identified as having a conflict with this application, not to participate in discussion. But with that being said, does anyone have comments on this application?
I'm happy to start. Can I just, when you say it's established, I'm not quite sure if that's true, or certainly because to me it's a new program. The established part may be the replication of a very tried and tested model by that's been in other jurisdictions. The impact justice model. Is that what you mean by the established? Or we mean, or who means?
That's a great question, Simon. So established
Casey,
was,
I can jump in if you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Simon, just to answer your question, that is what they indicated on their application, was that they were an established program, which is where we got that information. So.
Okay. I'll quickly scan. I need to go scan through again, but.
Do you have like a specific, question?
No, not at all. I mean, if I'm getting, I think it's a super strong proposal. I just wasn't sure that the partners already had. To me, established means it's something that you're like the Lane County thing, that it's something they're already doing. It's just they want to expand it, or they want to incorporate new case types, things like that. Whereas I thought this was a sort of getting a brand new program off the ground, which is awesome. But that's
they do say the program will utilize the established restorative community conferencing model.
I see.
And so I think it is, yes, I think you're exactly on point. That it's a new program within an established model.
Got it. Yep. Okay. And again, this is more of a point of detail, and I want to just confirm with the program team, the CJC team. I had asked that question on email to do with the administrative costs, and if they're, because the kind of above the budget totals line didn't seem to be the same as the below the budget totals, and was one pulling, was that a double counting of administrative costs, or actually was that not double counting? It was just not pulling the same number through.
Yeah, thank you. And we did reach out to Insight Alliance and receive confirmation that it was just a typographical error. I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but the one that was included in the summary that wasn't a specifically 000 number, that one was the correct one, and we therefore adjusted the one above. I don't know, Rachel, if you have those in front of you. You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm trying to find the right sheet here. I apologize.
I think
it was the 110,000 was the correct number.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so Simon, thanks again for bringing that up. But yes, the Insight Alliance did confirm just a typographical error. The number should read $110,000, and we did update that on our records to make sure that we had it all set to go.
Am I correct? Sorry, I'm just going to keep blabbing until, and you know what, Elaine, you've raised your hand. Let me stop talking.
I always like when I can say what he said. The mind-blowing part of this to me is that it's over $1 million for 8 to 10 people served. That's their proposed number of served people, the cases. Now, I know that there are more in terms of responsible parties. And so their number came out to multiples of that with the people that are impacted being involved. So there are definitely more people than that. But this is really, really, to me, it would have made more sense for them to say, we are implementing a brand new program. This is the guts of it. We're going to get it off the ground. We're going to try a few cases this year. But what we didn't end up asking people to respond to is what's going to happen when this money's gone. They're spending a huge amount of their budget in training and partnership with some other, and there's one line in there about that they're going to work together to write more funding proposals to keep this thing funded. But it is very few people served. If it is an established program, if it is a brand new program, I worry about how big it is. And then the drop-off point. I mean, it's just a huge amount of money. It's just a huge, and I know we've got the money and it's not overspending the total amount, but in terms of, it's just a lot of money for very few people served. And I don't see a proposal for how that's going to grow built in to anything. And even any predictors for what the capacity ultimately will be because of the work of this period of funded time. So it was just kind of mind-blowingly expensive to me.
I would echo that a little bit as well. I felt like just even the staffing of the program with the paid facilitators, which I'm all for paid facilitators, but for the amount of people being served, that didn't line up for me. I thought it was an incredibly strong proposal, well-written proposal. But again, it was a lot of money, but not a lot served.
Thank you, Charlie. Simon, do you have a response to that or another comment?
Yeah, I mean, again, I did think it's a big staff team. I'm just reading in here, the hiring 4 RCC facilitators, a case manager. There's a advisory committee. so again, it seemed like a heavy staffing model. That would be more maybe something to build towards. That would then then there's a sustainability question on that. Well, do you need 4 facilitators if, and even just the capacity, we're in this, being able to hire that many potential facilitators really quickly is maybe a challenge. And I'm just reading here, and I'm just, because Elaine, I just read here, during the pilot phase, 15 to 25 eligible cases will be referred for an RCC process, each involving approximately 6 members of the community. Therefore, 90 to 150 community members will take part based on those cases. So it's larger.
It is, that's referred, and that doesn't mean they accept, right? Yeah. So there was another place where it said less than that, but yes, they did. The number's not the issue. It's really what the point of all of these positions are ultimately to do, longer term, and that was more the concern. I mean, and because they wrote it as an established, and maybe that's just a mistake, and we can check that. It's a brand new program. It costs a lot of money to get it off the ground, but there's nothing graduated about it. It's just boom.
Yeah. And lean on that point, just for clarity, or in case this helps, the view of this as established or implementation might be different based on the staff reading it and your interpretation. I wouldn't want that to affect, they did not choose that, and no one wrote in there, we are established or we are implementation. So if that does sway your thinking one way or the other, please put that on staff and not the applicant, because we did select that.
It's not that. In fact, you can take that off the table. It's the other concerns about how much, how fast, how intense, and how expensive it is, with no clarity about what will exist in the wake of it.
For the GRC members participating in discussion, does anyone have ideas on, how they would like to move forward with responding to this application? Not that we have to make that decision now, but just,
Well, I'm curious, are we requiring or asking folks to tell us what they plan to do once the funding has left, or once the funding isn't available to them? Is that something that we were looking at?
Oh, go ahead, Casey, if you've got that, go for it.
I don't. I was like, go for it, Bridget.
So the application doesn't require, this is a funny grant period, and it just is a little bit tricky because it's a very annoying bureaucratic thing, but sometimes agencies get funds that are general fund, and we have to get those out the door by the end of a biennium, or we have to give it back to the general government checkbook.
Okay.
Based on the timing of when we received this grant and could get all this stuff and all you folks together, this leaves our applicants with 1 year for us to get the money out the door to them. They could spend it past June 30th, 2023. But I did notice that at least a few applications did write their proposal with that, well, we only know of 1 year in mind. And to, not to try and advocate one way or the other, but that is not within their control. And so we did not require anyone to say, and this is how we plan to fund it after year 1. There is a budget line item that suggests what other financial resources might you have at your availability? What do you, like, that's where we're writing for other proposals. Someone will give us in kind on this. That was kind of to try and support that point you're getting at, Vanessa, but strictly speaking, we can't hold it against anyone if they didn't supply a plan for July 1st, 2023, because I mean, at that point, we've given them the money that we have at that point. And there are plans to try and receive additional funds, so this program will continue after that point, but that's not within their control. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. And yeah, I think if I'm understanding, Elaine, your concern correctly, it's about sustainability, and also like what exactly will exist after all this is stood up. Is that correct, Elaine?
My biggest concerns are just the amount of money for the amount of service and the amount of structure. And it would have been good if we had some way to know this across all of the applications. So I know we can't hold it against them that they didn't, or even complain about it because they didn't address it because we didn't ask it. But it's just glaringly expensive, and we've seen a lot of variation on the cost of doing this work, and maybe it makes sense to fund one at sort of full tilt staffing and see if it makes a difference, to have a core set of paid facilitators, a core coordinator for that, and really see what more infrastructure right out the gate might do. So maybe there's a benefit to sort of seeing that variation ultimately. It's hard to not think about fairness, but maybe variation is really going to be useful to this knowledge base that we're trying to develop. So I'm not opposed to funding it. It's just, as a scrapping program ourselves, it's hard for me to not be aware of how much resource this one program is asking for in comparison to the others for the amount of service that they're proposing without knowing what's going to exist afterwards. So it's my best way of saying it.
Thank you.
I have a thought to add to that as well, in that since there are two applicants from Multnomah County, and one seems underfunded for their ambitions, and this one seems maybe overfunded for its ambitions. I don't know if it's an observation I have. I don't know if there's an answer to it, or if even there's a possibility of addressing the discrepancy of the two. I mean, one is offering 500 cases for, half the amount of money. And so I don't, it's an observation I have. And it's an established, for the Lutheran grant, it's an established organization that I think has great capacity to do a lot of what they say they're going to do, because they have history behind actually performing the work, whereas this is a new program. So it would be understandable that they would get more money because they are new. And I'm just throwing thoughts out there. So there you go.
That is why you are here, to throw your thoughts out and to discuss these applications. So thank you all for sharing. Are there any other comments that you wish to make?
Well, how do we, what's the right way forward? Yeah. It's I'm just going to repeat what goes through my head. It's a strong proposal. It's a proposal to replicate a tried and tested model in other jurisdictions. Super strong partnership from the district attorney's office, super strong partnership from Metropolitan Defender's office. It feels, and you could strip out, there's 160 grand in the budget of consultancy, technical assistance training to impact justice. So the kind of implementation costs is, take that out of it, it's 850,000 sort of say. I guess unlike some of the others, it feels like the Insight Alliance, you know, the 4 facilitators that are full-time, the full-time program manager, the part-time case manager, it feels like you wouldn't need all of that in the beginning, or you're gonna have 6 members of on a team a little bit twiddling their thumbs until they wait for the district attorney's office to actually pass through some cases. And I know we got our colleagues here, so I'm being a little facetious, but you know, is it something that we could say they could ramp that up? You know, I don't know, what's another way of saying it? I don't even know if they'll actually be able to get that whole team in place in one go. So maybe they won't spend all that money. But yeah, how do we, what's the response we can give to this proposal? I think we should fund it. I think it's imperative for us in Oregon to get this type of project off the ground, because it's pushing some boundaries in a way that some of the others aren't. The types of cases it is proposing to take. You know, it's a kind of probably the most ambitious on that level. But it seems, you know, there's a lot of resource going into it, and God, I'm in the nonprofit sector. I'm begging for resources all the time. So I don't want to underfund something, because that's typically what happens. But yeah, it's almost like there seems some costs that just won't actually get incurred.
Simon, on that point, we often see grants that take, I mean, it's hard to predict how long it will take you to get your team up and running, when the first cases will come through. And if, you know, if it turned out that the Insight Alliance, if approved, were to have underspending, there are ways that we can manage that on the sort of contract side, where if you know, here's your grant period, we'll put that in the contract. If you have not spent X number of dollars by, you know, a year and a half, 2 years into your program, the CJC, the commission can, I mean, we would ask for this before this point, but we'd say, what's your plan for getting this spent down? How can you reallocate funds within your proposal to spend it on your program, but maybe not, maybe you can't get all these folks hired. Now you have extra resources. Are you going to put that somewhere else? Or do we need to revert that back to the sort of greater restorative justice program pot, do another supplemental round? So I want to, in case this helps, if this application or any other were to underspend, there's ways of handling that. We'll just know a lot more after they are funded and up and running. And one thing to try and consider is that I know it's tempting to try to compare one program in a similar jurisdiction to another program in a sort of overlapping jurisdiction. But because this is so new, we just don't, they get to apply individually. So I just want to try and encourage folks to think through whether the Insight Alliance or Moltco Restorative Justice Program is on its own feet, not so much looking at it compared to the other sort of same area program, just because they are proposing different things, and we don't really have a good way of comparing two programs that you know fits in our oversight. So anyway, I'm rambling at this point, but I keep hearing that this seems expensive. I would ask folks to think about, you know, what and why, and if there's actual program components that you want to talk about, that's helpful. At the end of the day, you don't have to actually make a decision about the check that goes out the door. I would focus on, you know, does it fit the requirements of the program? If we need more clarity on things, like, we can also ask those questions as well. Anyway, that's enough. Elaine, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate what you just said about sort of managing things on the fiscal side. I think that makes a difference. I guess one of my questions is not so much whether they get it spent, but whether there is within any of these projects the possibility of extending the scope of work beyond the timeline of so a no cost extension, for example, since they're already going to have all the money up front, whatever they get allocated, can they, and how long can they sort of stretch it out so that they're actually able to sort of meet the goals of the project? not so much around spending the money, but meet the goals of the project. Yeah. Is there a timeline limit, or is there just a renegotiation at each juncture?
So I think it's a really good question, Elaine, and really we have a couple of different ways of sort of ensuring program fidelity and compliance. The most obvious and sort of clear cut is when we can fund things and for how long. This is one of those programs where, like I said, we have to allocate the money, so get it out the door so that it's no longer in state hands by the end of the biennium. We can work with different applicants on, all right, so your project period is going to extend till 2024, if that's their sort of, all right, we need this much time to spend this money. The piece about, are you fulfilling your program goals? That is a more complicated piece of oversight to manage, but what we do is we do progress reports and data tracking, like kind of like we talked about in other places. And
it was really just the first part of the question that was the thing, is whether or not they can extend the timeline. So I know there's going to be lots of oversight to the project and lots of learning to do. It was really that first part. Thank you. That was helpful.
Sorry, Elaine. I made it. Yes.
That's okay.
Yes,
Thank
you. Did I read? I feel like I read in some of the guidance or some of the budget, or it's somewhere that it said that these grant funds, even though the biennium ends June 30th, 2023, that these grant funds could be spent until December 31st, 2023. Did I misread that, or is that stuck in my head somehow?
No, so I mean that's the annoying but relationship between the project period is different than the grant period. The grant period is state has to get money out. The applicant, the grantee in that case, would have a contract that says, all right, we expect you to finish spending your money by December 30th, 2023. However, if folks come up with that's not going to work. It took us 3 months to get this person through hiring. We have $400,000 or $40,000. It's November. They can work with the CJC to do contract amendments to get an extra 6 months. I mean, that doesn't run in perpetuity. It's not going to be 2028 and you still have the same $40,000. But yes, there is some flexibility there.
Okay.
I'll just say something about the program. I'm really excited about the focus on the particular crime sets and the data gathering that they did, really identifying where there's disparity and where there is a potential return on investment for reduction of contacts in certain populations. I thought it was really well founded, the proposal and the targeting of the crime types that they have selected. And the age group, it's really I think very sharp and very clear, and it will. I think if it is successful, that there's a lot to learn here from doing even the preparation work that they've done to get to this application, in terms of how they're focusing their efforts. So it's clear that there's been a lot of thoughtfulness and a lot of effort around disparities and population served. So I really just want to go past the money now and just say that I think that there's a lot here to learn from and to grow in our state.
I also would add, unless I'm misreading or missed something somewhere, but the district attorney's office is all of its resources backing this program are basically pro bono. I didn't see a budget line for district attorney staff, but correct me if I've misread the budget.
You're correct, Simon.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is definitely the system, putting its money where its mouth is in that sense, right? In some ways, and we in some ways a complete opposite of the Deschutes proposal is, and it's just as valid. They're saying we need resources in the DA's office to do this. The Multnomah DA's office is saying, you know, we believe so much in this that we want to, you know, we're kind of putting our money on the table, which takes away from some of the other work I guess they do, or they're prioritizing this as in their resource allocation internally. Can we, I guess, I mean, my starter for 10, as the saying goes, is, you know, that we propose funding it as in its full amount. I would like some, you know, I guess some questions to them to say, you know, how are you going to get this off the ground? Or, I mean, if I was in this, you know, are you going to actually need to hire 4 facilitators and you know, all this stuff right on the bat when you're literally building a program? Is it more, you know, what would be the graduated, you know, you're hiring, you need facilitators in place as the volume of cases will grow. At the same time, you know, if they hired all of the staff tomorrow, most of them would be doing a lot of thumb twiddling, and I'm being probably very unkind, but, you know.
I think that I would, oh, go ahead and finish your thought.
Yeah, I guess, can they, and maybe I should read it more again, but, you know, can they respond with, you know, what's the kind of, you know, the ramp up plan in some way? I don't know if, Charlie, if that's what you're going to say, but.
I think I think how I am, I guess, wrapping my head around it is that I would absolutely fund the grant. It's amazing. How much? I do think that there needs to be a conversation about justifying the amount. But it's also my understanding that the committee actually does the funding portion of it, and maybe our recommendation would be that Inside Alliance does offer a conversation around a little bit of justification for the amount that they're asking for. And maybe, you know, maybe it's just not written in there, and so we don't have that information. But if the committee can require it, I would recommend funding, absolutely.
Thanks, Charlie. Do any other DRC members, you know, have a reaction to that, or are in support of that?
I'm in support of that. Like, I think they should justify more the level of spend.
Well, and Charlie and Simon, we can ask, and I think Elaine had some of these questions, so we can ask for, you know, what's your prediction for what it would take for you to get 4 facilitators on board? And it just gets a little bit more clarity on that.
But also,
I think that it goes a little deeper in that what are 4 facilitators gonna do? And do you need 4 facilitators for, what is it, 25 cases? If that's what they need, awesome. But I would, I think it's more than just like, what is it going to take for you to get all those people on board? Do you need all those people? That's my question. And that's the question I hear being asked as well.
If I were them and I'm launching a new program, my answer back to you would be, we're going to be working with this consultant. We're going to be building together our program. These facilitators will be in training and helping to develop the program. So, you know, I could see a pretty handy answer back to that. So, you know, early days, we're doing it together. We're planning it together. We're building it. We're in training together. We're working with the consultants right off the ground. And so the people that you have on there as paid facilitators are really in on the ground floor of the development and design and training that happens. And so, you know, I don't know if they can get 4 facilitators or anything, but it would be easy to answer that, I guess. If you're thinking about it as a package with a consultant and you want to have your facilitators on board by the time you're doing this big training, you know, yeah.
I guess then that goes to the piece of, you know, if you're ramping this up all in, front loading everything, you know, if this money isn't restored, what's the sustainability of the program? So that's where my mind goes.
Despite us not asking, this is the only proposal that even talked about future funding in its application. They did say that the work that they're doing with the consultant that they're working with would include, you know, project descriptions and funding, you know, fundraising support from that group. It was a sentence. It wasn't more than that, but they did mention that. So, you know, I think they are at least thinking about that as well. And that's a pretty hefty price tag for a consultant or a training program. So having that funding piece built in, you know, would be a good use of some of that money. So I do think they're thinking that way. And since we didn't ask the question for anybody, it's going to be tricky to ask it of them. So.
Well, what I'm hearing from those who have spoken is that you like the program, you do approve of the program, and as far as recommendations to the commission for funding, that maybe you would seek some clarification from Inside Alliance to justify the amount to, you know, explain, you know, our 4 facilitators needed at the start, and yeah, am I missing anything there? Is there anything else that we should be noting down?
I mean, really just ties in with that, and given how well thought through it is, given how involved, you know, the formal system partners, the DA's office and the defender's office, public defenders, you know, maybe they could say, yeah, we foresee that, you know, by month 3 there'll be 10 cases referred. Like, have they done some estimating on how quickly actually the cases will be referred? Often when you look at people, like, it's going to be 15 to 25 cases, and then we think of that over 18 months, you think, well, that's like 1 case, 1 referral a month. But it may not be. It may be that it's actually going to be 20 cases referred all at the beginning, and then it takes 18 months to work them through that. I don't know, but maybe there could be some more feedback on how quickly the caseload will build. And then say, you know, we think our experience, the feedback from Impact Justice in blah, blah, blah County, California, is that 2 facilitators on average can facilitate, you know, kind of work on X number of cases, you know, because they're complex and they're involving, you know, a factor of so many additional impacted people. And therefore their caseload, an average caseload would be 2 or 10 or 50. It just gives a bit more context to kind of what lies behind that staffing infrastructure that feels very big.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah.
Are there any other comments?
I just got to say, it is an amazing application, and I want to make that abundantly clear that I'm excited about learning from what comes from it. So let them know that.
Noted. All right. Well, I think with that, general consensus, moving forward with, yes, we approve of the application, and we've got some feedback and some clarifying questions, as regarding the funding request and the staffing structure that, it requires that funding. Are we ready to move forward to the next application? All right. So the Restorative Justice for Southern Oregon program was submitted by the Resolve Center for Dispute Resolution and Restorative Justice. It is an established program, and they propose to expand existing youth restorative justice program, which is called VIA, and support development of potential pilot emerging adults program. They plan to receive referrals from Jackson County Juvenile Department, community members, the Ashland Co-op, Fire District, Library Services, etc. Their general service area is Southern Oregon, Jackson and Josephine counties specifically. They did meet the eligibility requirements, and of the preferences, the program preferences listed with 6 with an asterisk, but I'm going to toss that one to Bridget real quick. I can't quite remember what the asterisk for the addressing case types.
The asterisk here was actually about the research entity and tracking, because the application described that they had done that in the past, but it was a little unclear as to whether that was the plan for the future. So in applying preferences, we gave the application the benefit of the doubt that if it was discussed as something that had been done previously, it was implied that it was open to being done in the future. The grant review folks, if you feel like that's too much benefit of the doubt, fine, it would be bumped down to 5. But we did, because that was discussed as something that had been done in the past. Anyway, that's how we got that one.
Thank you, Bridget. So to wrap up, rubric score 3.4 and total funding request $103,000, 328. Invite discussion.
Yeah, so I'm supportive of this application. I like that it kind of seems to be partially an application saying that they're going to build on their existing program, and then also that they're going to be looking towards creating a new program in the more 18 to 24-year-old range. I look forward to seeing how that progresses, and I think supporting them for both the expansion and the planning/implementation makes sense. One thing that was not clear to me was when they talked about the VIA program, I could not tell if they were saying that if someone goes through the VIA program, that there will actually be a dismissal of that case. It seemed to suggest that it was both a pre and post adjudication program. And so my vote on this one would be fully fund contingent on the fact that they confirm that youth are actually getting their cases dismissed when they complete this program.
I had a lot of the same issues trying to parse whether or not VIA is already a systems-based thing, both in terms of what Tristan just lifted up with the term adjudication in the juvenile system usually triggers that there's been a formal finding of some kind, and that this, I think to some extent, this is already a court-ordered referral, which would put it in a, if I understand it correctly, which would put it in a different category than the others we've been talking about, insofar as it would be post the equivalent of conviction. Also, in terms of the crime seriousness, and this has become thematic with these discussions. So I'll just flag that it's true here as well. It's very hard to sort of break out what the crime seriousness is going to be based on the information provided. They've talked about some of the existing referral networks, and its youth shoplifter and theft education program is one of their primary pipelines now. Well, I can tell you that's you shoplifters are not typically going to be presumptive prison. So, you know, we had this question with Lutheran, we had this question with Elaine, and I have it again here. It's very hard to tell if any of these are actually presumptive prison, but you know, so I would propose to handle it the same way we've handled it with the others, which is just something to note. But yeah, I had the bigger question that this being post adjudication, it would become more like a formal diversion and less like restorative justice insofar that as that's true.
Thank you, Aaron. I think our staff read on it as well was that they did not address case types with presumptive prison sentences at all.
One of the things that it seems like this project is really kind of a planning project as well, which I think is not a bad thing in terms of the variation on the themes that we've been getting in terms of where people are and what they've done before and what they are trying to do going forward. And so it sounds a bit like, you know, the planning work with the Jackson County DA to determine participant eligibility. Might be part of the way they're going to get to the answer to these questions rather than already have the answers to these questions. I think the one that Tristan mentioned needs to be addressed, but I think in terms of crime types and referral eligibility, it seems like they've been very clear in saying that they don't have those answers yet. And so I don't think we can ask them for that. I also appreciate that it's that they say it's envisioned as a building block for ongoing adult diversion from the criminal justice system as well. So it's like a, you know, what I appreciate about this and one of the others is just that transition age that often sort of falls off the radar for folks, which is, you know, they've hit 18, so the adult system kicks in, but there's no focus on the developmental or other needs of that age group. And so I'm reading in maybe, but I appreciate the focus on that group, that age group specifically in terms of restorative practice. It's beyond the juvenile justice system. It's a natural progression for them because of their experience with the younger folks, and it's a stretch for them because of that as well. So I'm just sort of appreciating that that's where they're pushing, is to make some of these resources available to this next age group that often gets thought about as just adult and separated into adult. So yeah, I think it's an interesting placeholder on the continuum of responses that we're hearing from.
Thanks, Elaine. Charlie, do you have comments?
Yeah, I personally loved this application. I find a lot of the approaches to restorative justice to be out of the box thinking. It's I feel very heavy community support and you know, that leg of restorative justice, that's the community impact piece where you know, they not only speak to community impact, but they also bring restoring the both the harmed and harming party back into the community. I love so much of this, and a lot of it is established program stuff, but I do see that they're wanting to expand, and I don't know what their capacity is. But if I were to be completely honest, I feel like they asked too little. Their budget doesn't show what the positions are that they're asking for to be funded, but to be able to see, especially the emerging adult piece of the 18 to 24-year-olds, I know they're piloting that, but if they were to receive more funding, could they fund those positions to, I guess, better address those persons and with restorative justice options? But I don't know, you know, what you know, caseload would look like. You know, maybe they don't have that many cases that go through there, but I do like this application, and I do feel like possibly it is one that is underfunded, and that could be more successful with additional funding.
Thank you, Charlotte. So I see, Delta, you've got your hand up, but I am going to ask that you hold off till public comment. Any clarification on the app itself, we can work with you. I just don't, we didn't give other applicants any opportunity to respond, so I don't want to give that opportunity where others didn't get it. So I apologize for not making that clear earlier, but we will follow up, and there will be a public comment period in this meeting in a bit.
I sure understand that. I do want to offer that there's a correction, that there's something actually that's been left out if it's valuable to the committee. So I don't know if you want it or not. I follow the rules, whatever. But
because we didn't give that opportunity to other applicants, would you mind? Let's hold off until public comment. And we'll sort it out. I apologize for not making that clear earlier, and perhaps for making a mistake here.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Yep.
I actually don't know if it was Simon first or Elaine first.
It was Elaine.
So, the application does clarify the crime types on page 7. It says for the emerging, even though they talked about these other sort of historical referral sources in the VIA program from before, it says for this program, Resolve will receive referrals for young 18 to 24 adult criminal cases involving more serious felonies, such as burglary, assault, and hate-involved crime. And so it's not absent in the application. And then the number of piloted cases will be modest, 8 to 12 over the course of the grant period. And that referral may come through DA, law enforcement, municipal courts, the university, or the community. So just to sort of note that, because I think I forgot that, but I've got it highlighted when I scrolled. So they do make a case. They do make a point of handling more serious cases.
Noted. Thanks, Elaine. Now, Simon.
I found exactly the same paragraph and was going to refer to that as well. But I also think so. It's a good proposal. It's building on an